All right, thank you.
Okay, we're in.
All right, well, in that case, I think just in consideration of time, well, I'm waiting on two co-sponsors, although they both promised they're going to be here imminently. So I might start gabbling us in with my necessary remarks to start. So, Harry, we're good to go?
Yeah. Definitely ready when you are.
Okay, great. All right. All right, I'm calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the Boston City Councilor for District 8 and the chair of the Council's Committee on Ways and Means. This hearing is a public hearing being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Fios Channel 964. We'll be taking public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you wish to testify via video conference, please email shane.pack, that's SHANE .pack, P-A-C, at boston.gov to sign up. When you are called, please state your name, affiliation, and residence, and limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes to ensure that all comments can be heard. You can also submit written testimony by emailing us at ccc.wm, that's ccc and .wm for Ways and Means at boston.gov. Today's hearing is on dockets 0839 and 1039, both orders for hearings regarding the Boston Police Department overtime budget and oversight thereof. And we're joined here today by Superintendent James Hassan, Chief of the Bureau of Administration and Technology, by Lisa O'Brien, Deputy Director and Chief Financial Officer for the Bureau of Administration and Technology, and Deputy Superintendent James Chin from the Bureau of Community Engagement. The co-sponsors of docket 0839 are myself, Councillor Andrea Campbell, who chairs the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice, and Councillor Matt O'Malley. And then we're also joined in co-sponsoring this hearing by Councillor Ricardo Arroyo, who's the sponsor of docket 1039. So I think what we're going to do right now is I want to move to brief comments from the sponsors and my colleagues who have joined us here today. And then we'll jump to the department. And then, this really is a working hearing. The objective here is to focus on how we achieve through oversight and through the department's protocols, the significant reduction in the police overtime budget that was budgeted in the FY21 year. And so we're gonna jump right into that. I just want to acknowledge colleagues who are here. I have to pull up my list in order. So in addition to my co-sponsors, Councillors Campbell, O'Malley, and Arroyo, we're also joined here today by Councillor Liz Braden of District 9, Councillor Ed Flynn of District 2, Councillor Julia Mejia at large, Councillor Asabi George at large, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, and I think that so far is our group. So I'll just briefly say that, as folks know, it was a major initiative of the Boston City Council and the administration to pass a budget this year that included a $12 million reduction in police overtime from the budgeted amount for FY20 of $60 million to a budgeted amount of $48 million. I should just note at the start that the actual overtime budget for FY20 came in at $72.5 million. Which means that when we talk about hitting that budget target of $48 million, we're actually talking about a $24.5 million reduction. So we're talking about something that looks more like a 1/3 reduction in practice than the 20% budgeted. So, this is a serious thing. And I think from the council's perspective, something that reflects a real call amidst the public to scrutinize how we're using public dollars on this front, and really think about the highest and best use for each one of them. And that's the spirit in which in July we called for these quarterly hearings to really scrutinize the department's plans and how we're doing, and sort of keep checking in quarter by quarter on how we're doing to meet those targets. And Councilor Arroyo filed a hearing in council in October, focused in particular on the related issue of court overtime oversight and sort of some concerns about oversight and protocols there that arose from the data he received from the department in the summer. So I want to now turn this over to my co-sponsor and the chair of Public Safety and Criminal Justice, Councilor Andrea Campbell, for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Councilor Bach, for the continued partnership here. And thank you to folks from the administration also for joining us. I'll be brief because we obviously want to jump right in. You know, this continues to be an issue in terms of not just focusing on how we're going to actualize the commitment the administration made with respect to the overtime reduction, which now, of course, it's higher than the 12 million, as you just beautifully articulated, that it's close to 25 million. In the last hearing, we got a lot of ideas and thoughts, but not necessarily enough specifics as to how we're going to actually make that happen. So I would, going to continue questions related to that. But since that last hearing, there have been concerns raised by many with respect to the accuracy of overtime records, also with respect to court overtime in particular. And so happy to have Councilor Arroyo, of course, join in this conversation specifically on those issues. There also has been some documents released by, the Woke Windows Project, as well as other advocates who've been paying close attention to this. So I think those additional layers are equally important, and just continue to remind us how important these conversations are to be having consistently, because I think it's been made abundantly clear that there are some major concerns, and the question is, how are we going to be more transparent, and then when something doesn't add up, be held accountable. And so looking forward to continuing.
I can't hear a word you're saying.
1 second. Excuse me, Superintendent Hassan, I'm just going to mute you while my colleague finishes.
Superintendent, did you say you can't hear us? I think he said he can't hear us, Councilor Bach.
I believe he said he could hear him.
We could not hear Councilor Campbell. It was very broken up.
Oh,
Am I broken up for you, Councilor Bach?
you are not broken up for me.
Yeah.
So it may be an issue with your guys' connection.
Where? Us?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think everyone else can hear Councilor Campbell just fine. So
Can you
Okay.
hear me now,
Yeah.
Superintendent Lisa?
are you hearing us all now?
I hear you.
yeah.
Yeah, you're fine. It was when Councilor Campbell got on, it was all broken up and very slow, like it was almost like in slow motion.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Oh, there you are.
There you are.
Well, perfect. So I'll just say it real quick. We're continuing the conversation with respect to not only actualizing the commitment from the administration with respect to overtime, which is not just 12 million, it's now looking at close to 25 million. But then additionally, since that hearing that we held, Councilor Bach and I held, there's been more concerns raised with respect to overtime, court appearances, and the accuracy of overtime records, which have been folded into this hearing, brought to the attention by advocates, as well as Councilor Arroyo's hearing order. So that's what I said essentially in a nutshell. I hope you guys can continue to hear me. And if you can't, just unmute and let us know. And so I look forward to continuing the conversation. I also thank you guys for being here. So hopefully you heard that too, as well as Deputy Superintendent Chen. So look forward to continuing that dialogue, getting at greater transparency and accountability. Thank you, Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. I'm next going to go to the third co-sponsor on docket 0839, Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you very much, Chair Bach. Thank you, Chair Campbell, both for your partnership in this. When we had originally introduced this in July, the purpose was not to have a one and done hearing, but to continue these processes, to schedule them several times throughout the year, several times throughout the fiscal year. One of the most important aspects of the job of the City Council is to be financial stewards. And I think that it was made abundantly clear through our budget process from the department, from the mayor, virtually to every city councilor, that we needed to get some overtime costs under control. We need to make some significant cuts right away. And for that to actually become a reality, we need to stay on top of it. We need to do what we can, working together to make sure that we're sharing information, coming up with best practices to employ strategies that will keep these costs under control, recognizing the fact that it's tough to plan for these always, but it's certainly never hard to keep on top and keep as transparent and open process as humanly possible. So that's another reason why we're doing these hearings. We'll continue to do so. Thank you all. I know I have a lot of information to get to, so I will conclude now, but it's great to continue to partner with my colleagues on this and looking forward to the work that lays ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. And now the sponsor of docket 1039, Councillor Ricardo Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the administration for being here for this conversation. This hearing order came about due to an investigation essentially conducted preliminarily by Woke Windows and Nathaniel Story with the information provided on police overtime records. And to be clear, the police overtime records that we received from BPD are the electronic records that are sort of the final step in receiving that overtime pay, because the rest of the records are paper. And so we've never seen a court overtime slip or a court overtime sign-in sheet or any of that. So those records were then cross-referenced with a database of police reports, not an entire database of all police reports, but a database of police reports available to Woke Windows, in which there were discrepancies found on dozens of officers where they're at other places at the same exact time that they're listed as being in court. In some cases, just on my own view of it, as somebody who's a public defender in these courts and knowing what the nearest courts would be, an impossible distance for them to have actually done the entire period of time that they're saying on their court records. And so that was concerning and alarming. And I think the reality is this is not a new issue. Some of you may have seen Trial 4, the Netflix documentary on Sean Ellis. Episode 5 was entirely dedicated to the fact that in the 90s, there was a known issue with court overtime fraud, frankly. They were making up courthouses and things of that nature. And then in 2012, the Boston Globe did a report on this very issue in West Roxbury District Courthouse, in which it was found that officers were forging signatures and sign-in sheets. Officers were signing in friends, and there were issues there in 2012, in which I believe the action that was taken after 2012 was to create this court supervisor position. And here we are in 2020, and there's still questions about this process. And so my hope is that transparency, the light of day, this hearing, we can have conversations that really elucidate sort of what the steps here are, what the oversight protocols are, what the checks and balances on this are, and how they're being conducted, and who's ultimately responsible for them. Because ultimately, in terms of court overtime, there's a number of concerning trends. Since 2014, officers have worked less hours in courts. However, their pay has been a higher percentage for non-worked hours, starting from 2014 to 2019, where that number was 47% of hours worked for 53% extra hours paid. And so we want to get into sort of what all of that is. And so I'll leave it there, but I wanted to make sure that you understood sort of where my questions were going to be coming from and sort of where I'm trying to highlight sort of for myself as a fiscal steward for the city, where the process is breaking down, if the process can be refined, which I believe it can be, and then how we get there. And so that's it for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. And now I'll go to other colleagues for brief remarks. And again, let's try to keep them brief so we can jump to the department. So the order will be Councillors Braden, Flynn, Mejia, Asabi George, Flaherty, and then Council President Janey. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will keep it very brief. I welcome the opportunity to have an update on progress, on goals that were set, and to hear from the administration and the police department how things are going. And that's it. I look forward to all the information that will be shared this afternoon. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and for chairing this hearing, and to the sponsors of the hearing as well. I want to say thank you to the administration for being here. I want to say thank you to the Boston Police for being here. This is an important issue, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. I also recognize that this conversation, it's about resources and it's about funding. I know we have to review these issues, but we also need to be sure that we have adequate public safety shifts covered, and be able to respond quickly to emergencies and incidences. I've worked closely with Deputy Superintendent Chin on many issues in A1 over the years. But I also know that many police officers are required to work overtime as well. And because of that, I would like to probably advocate that we need to significantly ask the question, how many more police officers do we need to hire in the city? I don't know if that's 300 or it's 400, but I think we have to have a serious conversation about when we have these retirements, a lot of police retiring, and when we have forced overtime, we have to look at hiring more police officers. Again, want to say thank you to the sponsors, Councilor Bach, and to the police officers that are here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Mejia?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm having internet issues, so just want to make sure. So good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to thank the chair and to the sponsors for calling this hearing. I'm really excited to be here because I know we would not be having this conversation if it wouldn't have been for the community activists who have been pushing us to do something about police overtime. This has been something of an issue since even before we got into office, and seeing the slow drip, drip, drip change has been frustrating. When it comes to police overtime, we already know what we know. And the data that we receive from the BPD and the ACLU today only confirms what we already knew, that police overtime spending is wasteful and oftentimes lacks transparency. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Many of the community advocates who have participated in these discussions have proposed innovative and creative solutions to this problem. We have an obligation to listen to them and to lead with their solutions. I look forward to this conversation, but more importantly, I look forward to what happens after the conversation. And I also just want to note that while this may be an uncomfortable conversation to have, it is one that is timely, and in hoping that those who are participating see this more as a calling in, not just calling out. And that if we're really serious about moving the needle and figuring out how we're going to work in the city, that we need to find new ways to work with things when they're a little bit uncomfortable. So looking forward to joining you all on this journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Asabi George?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the makers for bringing us together today and for this continued conversation, because I think as we keep this conversation continuing and open and the dialogue positive and collaborative, that we can actually do a few things that are important for us to do and be critical about the conversation that we're having today. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the continued conversation. Look forward to it this afternoon, and appreciate everyone's attendance and attention to the finer details. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Flaherty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the administration and to the Boston Police Department officials that are on here. And for me, obviously, to echo comments of some of my colleagues, in particular, Councilor O'Malley, in terms of our fiduciary responsibility. We learned the other day from the budget director that as of right now, due to COVID, we're about $50 million behind budget. So very problematic, obviously, as we move forward and start to talk about sort of a post-COVID world here for Boston, and making sure that the level of basic services that residents and taxpayers have come to expect is maintained. So that's obviously, it's incumbent upon all of us, not just the Boston Police Department, but every department, including the Boston City Council, to identify ways where we could be more efficient and identify cost savings if possible. So it's two questions really, kind of for me, in terms of a divided question. We have a couple issues before us. One is, how do we continue to maintain the level of police services and deal with the close to, I think, over 700,000 calls, 911 calls that come in, along with quality of life issues, the violence, the fireworks, the quality of life, the parties, et cetera, and make sure the staffing levels are sufficient, and also adjust to overtime needs based on that, as well as other things that pop up. And then there's the other issue is in terms of sort of the 1 for 4 the court time plus the detail system in terms of, whether or not that's sustainable moving forward, where we're looking at we're right now at a $50 million shortfall. So look forward to the discussion. Obviously, everyone needs to kind of be able to do their part, every department, to identify ways to have a budget. And we're so fortunate we didn't go to a 112 based on what is now playing out as a result of COVID. So we're lucky that the council was able to get this budget passed. But despite that, we're still right now, based on the budget director's call the other day, we're 50 million light. So the police and everyone is going to sort of have to find a way to do more with less moving forward. So look forward to the hearing and appreciate the opportunity to speak, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And finally, Council President Janey.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's a little soft, but
Okay.
no, now you just went mute. No, we can't hear you. You turn off your volume.
God, Jesus.
Here, you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I used half my time trying to figure out the technology, so I will be super brief. Just thanks to you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the makers. Thanks especially Councilor Royal for bringing this new layer into the mix. These are all important issues. Want to thank the representatives from the police department for being here, for your work every day, but also really for being here to help us solve this. The only thing I would add is, for me, this also speaks to the larger question around how we respond to crises in our city and whether or not we should be putting all of this on the shoulders of our police department. And so as we continue to look at the overtime, I hope we're also doing that in the context of reimagining how we respond to crisis in our city. So thank you, and I'm ready to get in as long as I don't have any more issues with my technology.
Great. Thank you so much, Council President Janey. And now that all the councilors have made opening statements, I want to turn it over to the department. I see we've got Superintendent Hassan now on a different line, but maybe I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent, and you can organize sort of opening comments from the department. You're muted at the moment, Superintendent.
Did you mute me?
No, no, we can hear you.
No, I'm just here to answer your questions. We're happy to be here. I hope we can bring some light to some of these questions with some of our answers, and we'll do the best of our ability to provide the answers to some of your questions. On behalf of the Commissioner and Lisa and Chief Long and Mayor Walsh, happy to be here.
Great, thank you. And I want to say for those watching at home, the council did send an information request to the department looking for data both about sort of Q1, which is the July 1st to September 30th window of the city budget, the first quarter, and also just with some follow-ups on things that had come up at our hearing on this matter in July. So we do have some substantial info from the department that I'll start out questions based on what the department provided us with. And as Councilor Arroyo alluded to, there's also some outside advocacy reports from the ACLU, Progressive Mass, and also focus on the court overtime issue, and also some recent work from Families for Justice's Healing on the detail issue. But Superintendent and BPD team, I'll just start off with my questions. I'll set a little timer on myself so that I don't go too long. So what the department submitted says that compared to last year, you've achieved this 14.6% reduction in the overtime hours year on year, which obviously, is substantial, and it would put us on pace to save $10.5 million for the year, I think. But obviously, I mean, the initial commitment was a $12 million reduction, but as I mentioned in my opening comments, to actually hit the budget because of how far over we were back last year, it's really a 24.5 million reduction, and we're obviously not on track to hit that right now. So I guess what the department pointed to in its materials it provided to the council was that court overtime is way down. I'd love to understand how much of that is due to the fact that much court business has been reduced, and that you've also held down some of the other categories, but that replacement costs are proving pretty much the same. And I guess I would like you to expand a bit more on what our challenge is with reducing replacement overtime, because I think from the perspective of the council and the public, what's very mysterious about it is that, I mean, we understand it to be about replacing people in order to achieve minimum staffing standards. But then when I asked for kind of, well, what are our minimum staffing standards across all departments, what we've gotten is just the feedback from you all that that's something that you determine kind of, week by week, month by month. And I guess it's hard to understand how we know what the department is taking as being full staffing, and that's therefore necessitating those replacement costs across the board if there's no objective standard that you can share with the council or the public. So that's probably the first puzzle that I'm really trying to understand here.
Okay, so the again, the way they determine the minimum level is the amount of crime, the population, the number of 911 calls, as Council Flaherty referenced, 700,000, and also the response times to these incidents. And that's a conversation that's held between the chief of the Bureau of Field Services and each district captain. And they're constantly reviewing that. In fact, they have a weekly deployment, they call it the deployment call, and they kind of review what's going on and make sure that, although that discussion doesn't happen then, but they kind of review what's going on in each district, and then they have individual conversations during the year with the individual captains. And that's how they determine what that minimum, what is needed to respond to adequately provide police services. And also we take requests from, the residents, politicians like yourselves, like if they have a concern, they're getting major events occurring, or even multiple minor events are occurring in an area, they'll ask requests for walking beats, and we try to respond to, but that's not part of the minimum level. Minimum staffing level is determined under those other 4 criteria that I mentioned.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess what's confusing to me about that is that, I mean, when you describe the 4 criteria, it sort of sounds like a formula, that there would be a base formula somewhere saying this is how much we are assigned to each of the districts, and then it would be adjusted in the conversation. But then the department's response to us and others is that there's no kind of like baseline numbers or formula that you can share on that front. So I just want to flag that it seems to me like if we're going to understand how to reduce resources, well, as Councillor Flynn and others alluded to, also securing public safety, like we need to have a sort of transparent understanding of how those minimum staffing levels are arranged throughout the city, and in what times and where people are assigned, and try, I think, for the council to understand where FIOs come into that, where other things come into it. I think it's very hard for us to do this bird's eye view, especially when replacement costs is so much of the overtime without that. So I'm flagging that. And then I guess another question I have about replacement is that, you sent us data on the extent to which we've had officers off for sick or illness or injury reasons. And I'm just trying to pull that up right here. But sorry, I have a lot of spreadsheets in front of me. Oh, here we are. So I guess, that number of officers out for injured or sick, it was at 146 in 2017, 151, 2018, 158 in 2019. So those are pretty stable numbers. Then it jumps up to 216 in 2020, and then 270 as of the end of September. So that's, 110 more than in 2019. And obviously that was already a significant climb to the 216 in 2020. So it can't just be I mean, it can't be COVID alone. So I just was wondering if you could speak to those injured and sick numbers and what's driven the huge uptick, because that seems like a significant source of our overtime costs. Hi, Superintendent, sorry, you're muted again.
Yeah, so some of those don't, that 270 doesn't reflect the COVID. It reflects some COVID, the ones that have been long-term, but that basically is people out injured or sick, long-term sick. So, so a lot of that reflects the some of the injuries that occurred during some of the demonstrations, and you know, basically, you know, that's what it's about, you know. So between the COVID and the people that got injured, so it's a significant amount.
So I guess
we're working towards reducing that. So
yeah, I guess what I'm trying to understand is it was already up 60 between Jan of 2019 and Jan of 2020 before COVID, after having sat pretty stable. So that seems like a pretty huge spike pre-COVID, pre-demonstrations, everything. And trying to understand if the department has any idea about why that is.
I don't know at this point.
Okay, and then I want to I've got a bunch of questions, but I know I'm going to just need a second round on this. I guess one other question I have is just if you or Ms. O'Brien or the deputy superintendent, if anybody could just speak to, obviously this 14.6% reduction doesn't hit the budget target. As Councillor Flaherty alluded to, citywide, we're at least $50 million in the red for the year. It seems like to achieve further savings beyond being on pace here, you would need to make some structural changes of some kind. And I'm just curious what, if anything, the department is contemplating on that front.
So I do have the latest. It's, so that was as of September 25th. So as of October 16th, we're actually at 17.9%, which is, you know, small increments compared to the numbers that you're talking. So we had a pretty comprehensive plan to reduce that overtime numbers, but unfortunately, with the increased crime and the potential presidential elections and the demonstrations and the COVID, we've been unable to implement that up to this point. But as you know, and also it's seasonal too with the summer months. So we're hoping to try to implement that going sometime in the near future.
All right, well, thank you. Follow further up on that, but I want to allow my colleagues to get in. So I'll go now to Councillor Campbell. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Lisa, and Deputy Superintendent Chen. Just following up on the minimum staff, I too am, you know, we got some of this information a little late, so I'm still digging into it, but would love, and we can continue that conversation, Councillor Bach, on the minimum staff standards, because it's still a little confusing to me too. But I really want to focus on the sort of this transparency and accountability piece. So on the transparency side of things, clearly we're requesting information from you guys with respect to, you know, what the overtime, what it currently is, the breakdown by districts, by units, any discussion on making this information just public so that we don't have to request it. You know, a lot of what we've been talking about in policing reform has been just more transparency and automatically posting this information on whether it's a public dashboard or some sort, so it doesn't have to be requested, including, you know, our numbers of women and people of color and into various roles or staffing. Some of that information is public, but not all of it. So my first question is, any conversation in the department or with the administration on making some of this overtime information and breakdowns public automatically in a public on a public dashboard of some sort? My second question, and I'll ask them all at once because I know time is probably going to run out, is on the, I guess it's 17.9% reduction thus far, sort of how was that achieved? How did you guys make it happen? And what's the plan or strategy, if any at all, to try to get to the 24.5 million? Because we're not there yet. And it may be we don't really have one, or given the number of crime, et cetera, it's just not going to happen. I don't know. But that's my third question, is how do we close the gap? So how do we realize the 17.9%? How are we going to, what's the strategy and plan to realize the 24.5 million? And then my next question is, any conversation, and this is more long-term, around abolishing the 4-hour minimum, capping overtime, reorganizing the department in such a way that there's more coverage in the districts. Maybe it's doing away with some of the specialized units. I mean, this came up in the previous hearing, but these bigger conversations on reorganization, capping overtime, and abolishing the 4-hour minimum. Curious if there's been any further discussion or decisions with respect to those things. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So, yeah, as far as the posting that information publicly, there really hasn't been any discussions on that. So, I mean, maybe we could have a discussion on that. I'll certainly bring that to, Commissioner Gross. And also, as far as the 4-hour overtime, that's contractual. So, I mean, that would have to be determined at the bargaining table. So, so there's really no discussions on that. We've just accepted that and moved on. But what was the other question, Council?
It was also with respect to capping overtime, reorganizing the department, and then the others was just on the numbers, how we actualize that 17.9%, and what's the plan to try to actualize the rest so we get to the 24.5 million.
Okay, so as far as reorganizing, that's there's been some discussions on that, but again, public safety is the paramount issue there, and some of those units that we discussed are critical to providing the safety that the residents of Boston expect from us. So, but those are ongoing, and we're trying to come up with innovative and strategic ways to achieve that 25 million. But so for instance, we have replacement costs. Like, even though we've our injured is up significantly, we've basically remained flat on that, which is it's a 0.4% increase, which is amazing that we've been able to do that. So still providing the services, and then the demands on these offices, it's been incredible. Given the COVID, where everyone else is hiding, they're out there every day working, exposing themselves. Our numbers are going up. As we speak, we're back to 105 exposures. We were, at one point we were up to 400, which also means a 14-day quarantine. We're back to 100, because what occurs in the society is reflective in the department, because of, there's probably no other department in the city that has the number of interactions with the citizens than Boston, than the police. So hence the effects of that is the rising COVID. So, so all this is occurring, and then, the psychological effects that's been happening to the offices, like, in my opinion, these offices are probably the finest offices in the country. And, the citizens of Boston are lucky. They have probably the most educated police force in America, which there have been studies that with the education comes less instances of force, more compassion, empathy. So there's a lot going on here with these offices, So anyway, getting back to the reorganization, that is a discussion that we're having, but, you know, we're doing a phenomenal job trying to keep that down, that overtime with that replacement. You know, the extended tours, it's down significantly. You can see right across the board. Court time, obviously, with the courts, 77% reduction, you know, but so we're trying to come up with ways to get to that number because we know it's important to you, it's important to us.
I see the gavel. I can wait to the next round on that. And I do think it's important to say and to continue to say, you know, as I interact with officers, particularly with respect to incidents in my district, that, you know, I want folks to know that what we're pushing for in transparency and accountability is systems and department reform, not a knock on individual officers who are doing a hard job every day. So I often say, you know, if there's a shooting at 2 a.m. or a stabbing, no one's calling me. So I understand that. So I want to lift that up because I have also heard about officers are obviously getting COVID as well and want to make sure they're okay. But the line of questioning just has to do with the course commitments that we made, transparency and accountability. So I can wait for the additional round 2.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Yes, and I'll just remind colleagues, my intention is I'll give you 5 minutes and then put the gavel up and then still give you that other sort of 2-ish minutes of grace time like we did back in the day. So next up is Councillor O'Malley.
I've missed those halcyon days of you keeping us in check for hours upon hours on end, Madam Chair. So it's good to see the gavel back. Thank you, Soup, Deputy Soup, Ms. O'Brien. Soup, particularly thank you for our great working relationship when you were at E5 for many, many years. So appreciate you, your leadership in this role. And that's good news. I don't want that to get lost. The 14.6% reduction thus far is good news. And I think we all agree that we have more work to do, but did want to acknowledge that. My first line of questions, I think you answered with Councillor Campbell's question as it relates to the 4-hour minimum on court appearances. That is something that is collectively bargained, right, Superintendent Hassan?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's something that there's a sort of a companion series of hearings that I know the chair and others have put forth as it relates to the contract. So I know that's something that will be continue to be explored. Superintendent, we had talked at the last hearing on this, and I wanted to sort of revisit about the shift length experiment. This is something that several other departments have done, including Everett, Massachusetts, Detroit, Michigan, Arlington, Texas, which goes from the 5 8-hour shifts to 4 10-hour shifts. And it's a proven model that actually can save considerable amount of money in overtime. And I think we had sort of talked about it sort of in theory. And I think you or others had said that, you know, you'd look into it and get back. But I'm just curious, has that been explored any further since our last conversation?
Again, Councilor, that's also collectively bargained. And, you know, we've kind of discussed it and how we present it. But not thoroughly. We haven't really looked into it too thoroughly. But
No.
Definitely something, you know, I think if it has benefits, we should definitely take a look at it.
So I didn't realize that was collectively bargained. That seems to me, I'm not a lawyer, but that seems to me that wouldn't, and I don't want us to get into this esoteric discussion about collective bargaining and what should or should not be on the table, but I didn't realize that something like that, the shift's length would be considered part of a contract negotiation. That just couldn't be a parameter set forth by the department?
Yeah, no, so like as an example, so when they used to do the 4 and 2, so then they went to the fixed shifts, so that had to be collectively bargained. And when they did that, that's when they created the different hour. So it used to be, used to have different shifts and, you know, so the hours are collectively bargained. Yep.
Okay. Well, then I will be redundant because I'll bring this up again at our next contract hearing. It just seems to me that this shift length experiment is happening sort of for the last couple of years as a way for departments to save money and better deploy their officers. I know, as I mentioned, Everett's doing it, admittedly a much smaller municipality, but they do 2 platoons, 4 10-hour shifts, 4 days off. 3 daily work shifts from 6:45 a.m. to 4:45 p.m., 4 p.m. to 2 a.m., and 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. with double personnel from the 4 and 4:45 and 9 to 2 a.m. shift. And it's just a way that we can increase officers on the job and thus lower what would be needed for overtime. And it's my understanding, wasn't that form deployed for the election earlier this month?
No, we earlier this month, we went what they called 12 and 12. So we
Okay.
had officers working from, 7:30 to 8, and then from 8 to 8 the next morning.
So that wouldn't be,
12 hours, yeah.
but that would be a similar situation where the shifts were, so I guess back to my earlier point, that obviously wasn't collectively bargained. So there is some opportunity for the department.
Yep. We've used that, and we did that back in the 2004 with the DNC as well. So whenever, and I
So it's
think
more event.
the
It's
marathon
event-driven.
emergency, it's an exception to the rule.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. But I assume it's deployed because you want more officers out. And I mean, talk to me a little bit. What were I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. What were sort of the circumstances? You wanted more officers out for a longer period of time, I assume is the simple answer.
To make sure that we were adequately staffed, and it's expensive too.
Yeah.
Council, because beyond their shifts, they get paid the overtime. So that's a very expensive endeavor. So it's not something you want to bring out only under the most extreme circumstances and not knowing what was going to go on with the election.
No, and that's totally fair. But so if you're an officer who worked on election day from 7:30 a.m. till 8 p.m., you were paid 8 hours base salary and then 4 hours overtime?
Correct. You get paid from 4 o'clock to 1600 to 2000. But yeah, 4 to 8, you got an extra.
All right. So yeah, no, so I totally get that. But I guess I'll conclude now by saying I think that further proves my point that looking at a shift change, length of shift changes, and somehow I guess we'll have to ratify that through the collective bargaining process, but that will allow us better coverage at an actual salary, not going into overtime for that salary as we had to do on November 2nd, while at the same time having the staff levels that I think will allow us to not need additional overtime. So it seems to me that as we talk about other examples or other suggestions on the table to get these overtime costs under control, just simply looking at the shift change experiment would be a great way to address a lot of that. So that's all for now. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Superintendent and team.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. And yes, we are going to be having another working session on the contract as a policy document and our expectations there. So I think we can bring this up there. Before I go to Councilor Arroyo, I just want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilor Lydia Edwards from District 1. Councilor Arroyo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to heads up. I'm probably going to need, definitely going to need a second round, might need a third. And so Superintendent Hassan, you were here on July 28, 2020 for the hearing that we had on this, the first hearing we had on this. And I asked you whether or not somebody could be paid overtime for a court appearance if they were actually on duty. And I believe your answer back to me was, in order for you to receive court overtime, you actually have to be off duty. Is that accurate?
That's what I said. Yeah, that's what I believe.
No, I mean, so is that accurate in terms of the finding that in order to receive?
Yeah. I mean, you have to be off duty to get overtime, right?
So I guess my question with that, where I'm incredibly confused by this, is we have officers who are in court receiving court overtime over 150 working days of a 240-day or 245-day court session. How is it possible that officers?
I'm not aware of that.
I mean, it's in the data that you've given me. So in terms of the BPD data, and I'm happy to disclose names and do all that offline and give you all of that. But sure. We have officers who are showing up in court receiving overtime. If you log their individual court appearances, they're above 150 days of court time. How is it possible that they are off duty 150 court days of the year unless there's some planning in that. And I guess my question for that is, this is a question I didn't think to ask at our last hearing, but is it possible that an officer can be off duty, say at 8:30 a.m., be back on duty at 9 a.m., but if they appear at court when they're off duty, it triggers that 4 hours? Is that possible? Can you be on duty and off duty on the same day, but if you show up at court during the period you're off duty, receive that overtime pay?
If you're, again, getting back to Counselor O'Malley, if it's within your shift, you can't, the overlap, you can't get paid. So if you work 7:30 to 4, and I try to put a slip in, an overtime slip for 8:30, it would kick out. It would not, the system would not allow it to be entered.
Certainly, but my question is, if your shift starts at say 9 or 8 a.m. or ends at 1 or 2 p.m. and you show up at court at 2:30 or right before or right after your shift, and then you shift over into the regular hours. So let me make this perfectly clear for everybody listening. If your time, if you go from off duty to on duty, does the fact that you started your court time off duty allow you to collect 4 hours of overtime pay on top of that on duty time?
So, yeah, I'm not really following you, Counselor. So let me just.
Let me try and make it really simple.
Hold on.
Let's say you don't start duty till 9 a.m.
When you say off duty and on, like, that's where you're losing me.
So let me try and make it
You're
really
regularly scheduled tour of duty, is that what you're talking?
Yeah, so let me be very clear. Let's say your regular tour of duty starts at 9 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. and you show up at
none that start.
So what's the start
There are
time?
none that start at that time, though.
And that's helpful. So what are the start times for the duties? What are the actual duty times?
Well, 7:30 to 4.
Yep.
There's actually 6 start times, right? So I know it's going to get confusing, but it's all.
No, just give me the times. That's not confusing. 7:30 to
4 to 11:45, and then 11:45 to 7:30.
Okay, so 11:45 to 7:30, there's no way for you to be at court. But if you're on a 7:30 to 4 shift, that is court time, correct?
If you're on a regularly scheduled tour of duty?
Yes.
If I'm working, it's a Monday, I'm scheduled to work Monday, 7:30 to 4, yes.
So that's so you shouldn't be able to achieve overtime pay.
No, the system would not allow you to have people put the wrong dates down or whatever, maybe, but the system would kick that out. It's not, you can't put a overtime slip on the same time that you're working a regular tour of duty.
Unless, could I chime in here, Super?
Yeah, please.
Unless they're on a day off or they're on vacation, because they normally would work a 7:30 to 4 shift, but if they're on a day off because they rotate on days off during the week, so if they're on a day off and they appear for court, they can sign into court on their day off for the court time, even though it's their normal shift hours. But if they're on day off, they can attend court.
Yeah, because
that's not their regular tour of duty.
That's not their regular tour of duty. Yeah, I would see that as separate. But here's what I mean. So one of those shifts is 4 p.m. to 11:45 p.m.
Correct.
If that person was to show up at court at 1 or 2 p.m.
Yep.
And then they're out of court at 4:30, they're still going to get the full 4 hours of overtime pay, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Even if they go on duty during the stretch of time that's covered. That's correct?
Yes.
And do you know how often that occurs?
That I don't know how often that occurs.
Okay. In terms of the work days, how many days of a year? There's 365, and I understand that officers have one of the jobs that requires an officer on the job 365 days of the year. But out of the 365 day of the year job, how many of those days is an officer expected to be on duty?
Well, I mean, if they work 5 days a week, so, and then, they'd have their 2 days off, although it's in the form of 4 and 2, you still work 5 days that week. So, because it's 7 days, right? So so you have 2 days off a week. The 2 days just causes it your days off to rotate. You still work 5 days. So, and then you'd have your vacation, personal days. So,
So I see the gavel, and so I'm going to honor the gavel. I'm obviously going to need more rounds than this, But just to be clear, so that you understand what my concern is here, I'm concerned that we have officers that are in court getting overtime pay for being off duty, logging in 150 days. Just in D4, you had 4 officers or 5. No, 5. Let me just make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 officers who logged 862 court appearances in a single year for overtime pay. And so when we're talking about the overtime pay, if they're off duty, I have a really hard time understanding why they're not scheduling this for when they don't have to actually chime in for the overtime, knowing that in that process, as a public defender, that's something that most of these cases are happening in the morning, almost all of them, trials, all of that starts in the morning. And so unless you're working dedicatedly the night shift, it doesn't make sense to me that you would have that many days in court for OT. And so I'll get back to that.
Just on those numbers, Counselor.
Yep.
862, I would have to say that I mean, I don't know this because I don't know who you're talking about, but I would have to say that they, and that's split between the 8, right? 862 between 8. So
Yep.
that's an average of 100 and what, 20, 110 each.
Something like that. Take.
Yeah, so out of the year, so they probably work the night shift, and so it doesn't. I mean, doesn't sound that out of line, but I'd have to. I'm answering blindly. I don't know what you're talking about. There's probably as many possibilities why as there is, that there could be other possibilities. So
I'm going to let it go there so that we can keep moving down the line, but I'll need a second round. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely be going to a second round, Councilor Arroyo. Before I jump to the next person, I just do want to allow, I think I was informed, Lisa O'Brien, you might have some slides. And I just think that because folks are watching at home, it might be helpful to throw those up in advance of our next questioner. You're muted right now. Sorry, Lisa, you're still muted.
yeah, these slides are basically the answers to your questions that you submitted.
And then you share.
So here we go.
That you want to share, and then press.
Here we go.
File. And press open. Oh no, I'm sorry. Do you want to put it on?
I'm open.
Do you want to put it on the screen, those slides, or?
Yeah. I couldn't find presentation.
Presentation, which is where?
That was new presentation. Share.
Can you let them know that we can hear her?
Yeah, just
in case, we don't want another hot mic moment up in here. Bach, you better let them know.
Right now, they just sound like all of us trying to find slideshow presentation. It's a universal experience.
My apologies. It's in a Google Drive versus not a PowerPoint application, so that's where we're having a little bit of difficulty.
Is it coming up?
Can you go through the slides right there, Lisa, like that?
Can you see everybody see the slide?
Yeah, we can see them.
Yeah, maybe if you even just drag the window to be slightly larger, it would probably work.
The whole thing.
And
here we go.
There you go.
Perfect. I think that's certainly enough for me to read. Can others read that? Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So Super, do you want to
go through them? Do you want us to comment as they go through? These are answers to your questions, Counselor. So, I mean, if you want to.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I just think that because folks watching at home don't have they don't have the question doc in front of them and they don't have your guys' spreadsheets, I think it would probably be useful to, there we go. To just run through these. And I think also, and I hope my colleagues will forgive me for pausing the questioning, but I just think that it will also help counselors direct their questions as well. So
yeah, I don't know what you find, but these are the questions, answers to the questions that you had. So the Councilor Bach had submitted, I don't know, was it a 12-page document with all different questions?
Yeah, it was a summary of the questions that were asked at the July hearing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and these are basically the answers to, there was what we're doing, how we're tracking the overtime and monitoring. Again, they have a weekly Bureau of Field Services superintendent discusses the overtime each week with each captain. But prior to that, prior to this COVID, we had, during the comp stat, we always analyzed, that would be a significant portion of that meeting where each individual, not just the captains, every unit had to get up and talk about what was going on with their overtime, why, what they expected to, needed to be in the, upcoming weeks. And, so to monitor it, also to learn from each other how to minimize the overtime. So that was, the regional lockup. We submitted a proposal that seems to be moving favorably. We did get some feedback last week from the sheriff's department. They have lobbyists working on that. So that seems to be moving in the right direction. And we're hoping that pans out for us because it would be significant savings, and also the well-being would be significantly increased with under the care of the sheriff. So, of the prisoners. So, obviously we're being decimated by this pandemic more than any other city department. So, and the demonstrations, I don't have to revisit that. And so we did have some internal structural changes planned, but they're on hold until we can get a grasp of what's occurring externally from the department. So if you could move to the next one, Lisa. Unless, does anyone have any questions of that before I move to any slide? So
No, it's fine.
the update, it's actually 17.9% decrease in overtime. Replacement costs, amazingly, even though it's still 44% of our total overtime costs, and the increased people out injured with that has remained flat. We really have done not to pat ourselves in the back, but we've done a fantastic job with that. If no one else believes it, that's fine, but that's the reality of it. The events, special events in court, down, extended tours, down. We continue to, our main goal is public safety and officer safety. So that's where we have to draw the line right there. We understand, all about budget reductions, and believe me, because we see what's going on. We're not insulated from society's concerns, but public safety. And as you'll know, I mean, I have the crime stats up year to date. So we're actually, even though we're down 4% for the year, but in the some of the violent crimes, we're up significantly. So we really have to worry about people's safety. So, and that's our goal. That's what we really care about. But go ahead, Lisa, if you don't mind. That was a question that I think one of the counselors asked: how many hours ordered, how many not ordered. You can see that, again, the officers are under a lot of strain. That people think that, they're jumping on the overtime. Like we all have families too, and personal lives that we want to try to enjoy and live. But here, they get ordered an awful amount, especially since May 31st. So then the hours worked significant. There are some hours that.
Superintendent, can I break in just to say, I think on the spreadsheet you sent, those numbers were reversed in their labeling. Like, I think it says the higher number was labeled not ordered and the lower number ordered. So I just love the clarification about which is right,
that would make
the spreadsheet or the slide.
Sorry about that. That's, yep, that,
yeah.
Sorry, which one is correct?
I would say that you're right, Counselor. If I had to, I mean, those are significant hours ordered.
Yeah, so I think it was more like 10% of hours. I think when I looked at it, it was like 8.5% of hours that were ordered.
Yep.
So we should flip. Okay.
Yeah, I actually have, hold on, let me, I'll tell you, I have that information right here. So.
Super, that is correct. It should be flipped.
Yeah, yep. Okay, sorry about that, Counselor. And now the hours worked, and that is correct. So you can see that is, although there are some 4-hour, because again, the court time is significantly reduced. So those hours paid, not worked, that's where a lot of that occurs in that setting, because they'll get the 4 hours. And it's the officers, it's more than, like they say, oh, you're only there 20 minutes. No, it's taken, not that I want to justify the full 4 hours, but, it takes traffic, get dressed. You got to take time out of your family's time, get a drive to whichever court, probably downtown, which is an hour ride from wherever, Dorchester, West Roxbury, Brighton. Then you sign in, you go to court, and you come back. It's a minimum 2.5 hours out of your life. So, although it says 15 minutes, nothing is 15 minutes. So,
And
anyway,
can I just confirm with this? So the hours paid not worked and hours worked, this breakdown is for all overtime besides court overtime, right? I think when I looked at
everything.
But I don't think this includes court overtime, because I think court overtime, we had 3,900 hours paid not worked for the quarter. So I think that's a separate,
See,
right? That was my impression from the spreadsheets again.
no, I don't. Let's see here. Yeah.
I don't want to hold us up. We can come back to that question.
Okay, yeah, no, you were right. I have that 3891.75.
Right, which obviously is that's more hours not worked paid for court overtime than the entire, it's about double what that category for everything else. So it's obviously not included here.
Yeah, it doesn't include court, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and I want to be mindful of colleagues' time, so maybe I'll stop interjecting just if I see something like that, and then if you guys want to go on speaking, yes, go ahead, Super.
Oh, I thought you wanted to give your people some time. All right, so then the retirement, I mean, it's held pretty, so we figured that coming up would be 156, because we were averaging last year 66, and then this January we have we're averaging, minus January last year, about 6 per month. So we utilize that figure, and with 72 coming up in this January, so that's how we came up with that number, and plus the 18 mandatory. So that's 156 that are going to be going and coming up. And we do have a recruit class in there, 110. We're hoping to get 100 out of there, which we want the next class to start soon. I think April or May, as soon as we can, which would be another class of 70, with the expectation that we'd probably lose 10. So we'd have a net of about 160. And then with the retirements, so we'd end up with about a net of four. But we can go to the next slide. So here's where you have your numbers for the officers out of work. We've already kind of reviewed that to your question. Question. So if you have further questions, if not, we can move on.
Yeah, let's keep moving.
Yeah. Okay, the paid detail. So we did have superintendent. So, we did implement a new position here under the auspices of the commissioner by Superintendent Marcus Eddings. And his function is to monitor the paid detail system and the court system for, make sure that things are going up to par, and that any issues arising out of, overtime issues and just all the negative stereotypes of each system. So he's trying to work that out, but that's one managerial goal that we put in to have him do that. So, and you can see the cost of the paid detail system. Can that go, that slide go up, Lisa? I can't see the how many filled and unfilled, but
This is a separate slide. So this was just saying what the cost is to run the detail system and the makeup of the personnel makeup. So the next slide speaks to what receivables we currently have related to paid details. I just want to point out that paid details is basically we're reimbursed by the vendors themselves. So this is not out of our operating budget. It's purely, dollar for dollar. We get reimbursed plus a 10% admin fee on top of that as well, which goes into the general fund.
But just to clarify, Lisa, going back to that slide.
Yes.
Sorry, moving around, but yeah. But this is the amount in those receivables that were owed by outside entities that haven't been paid.
Yes.
And
yes.
and when it says fully funded for the first three, what does that mean?
We've fully reserved for them in the event that they deem uncollectible. I got to give a shout out to my paid details unit here at headquarters. They do a tremendous job doing collections, and my feeling is we don't write off a receivable if we know there's a viable vendor out there to collect. So we work collectively with the city to try to get these down, and they have come down tremendously as soon as we converted the balance onto the general ledger here or onto the city's assets. So that's basically, they're fully reserved under the operating budget in prior fiscal years. So I don't think there's a slide here for those that went unfilled, but I can gladly share that information with you.
I think it was on the bottom of the slide, the super.
Yeah, on the bottom right here. So, yeah, I have it right here.
Yeah, right there.
So unassigned was 26,410, and assigned was 23,856. And then I think the last, then the next one is what the cost savings of the regional lockup would be. Never mind the human costs of, psychological effects of and physiological effects of being housed by the people that are in that business. So, yep. And then the last slide is it was a question of discretionary, non-discretionary, and that's where you can read it for yourself. We recognize the importance. Constantly monitoring our officer. Yeah, we're working on getting them back to work. We're doing everything we can to help them with their mental and physical well-being. Yep, and I mentioned earlier about how the bi-weekly comp stat, how we really review all the overtime. It really is. That's why people all around the country come and and witness how we do it, because it's really an effective tool. So I think that's it on the presentation.
Great, thank you. All right, I want to jump back to Councillor questions. So I think next up is Councillor Mejia, and then it'll be Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes. I have to say, Chairwoman Bach, this is I feel like I'm trying to crack the Da Vinci Code. This is all very confusing, and I'm having a hard time following it all. So I'm going to just start with how difficult it is for me as someone who works in city government. So if I'm having this difficult time understanding all of this, I just can only imagine what those who are following along are trying to understand. So I just want to name that as what I'm struggling with and trying to make sense of this all. But I do have some specific questions. One is, the last time we had a hearing on police overtime, I asked what systems were put in place to determine the number of officers who worked overtime during a protest. I didn't really get a clear answer as to who makes the decisions on how to staff these protests, given that we just learned that the BPD has spent over $1.3 million to protest overtime so far this year. Can you give me more of a clear answer as to how the BPD determines how to staff these protests, who sits at the table and works it out, how are officers chosen, and how do BPD, do you guys do any outreach to community organizations or the people leading the protests beforehand? So I know there's a lot here. I'm not using all my 5 minutes for this little one question. So I just need to be real. I just want to know where do we stand with police overtime for protests and who makes that decision? Just really quick, who can answer that?
Yeah, so I can answer that. They have a committee called Special Events, which is a committee that's involved with many city agencies. It's headed up by the Bureau of Field Services, and they conduct these meetings through the special events, and they determine the number of officers needed. So, like for instance, this last potential with the presidential, they determined that we needed everybody.
Yep.
So that's how that's how they determine that. It's not just one person. It's a group of people that make that decision.
Thank you for that. So I also want to take a moment to bring some questions in from the community. We asked some folks out on our social media to ask questions. And this was a question that I've heard this from other officers as well. And I thought this would be a really good question to ask here is, we have officers that take OT and then returning to their normal hours with little to no sleep. How does the BPD address officers who are working so much that they're literally harmful to themselves and the people that they serve?
Well, they're limited to the amount of hours they can work during the day. So generally it's your regular tour and then plus another tour. If you get beyond 17 hours, then you're sent home. I mean, there are the rare occasions when there's just no one else available and it has to be maintained, then they'd be in order and expected to, like I said, those very, very rare occasions. And then they're also limited to the number of hours per month. So they have a number of hours per day and number of hours per month. But again, these officers, like you said, Counselor, they're under immense stress, trying to live a life and provide the services that the city demands. So,
really quick, do you know that are there officers who are working up to 17 hours per day? And the reason why I asked this question is because we know that this is something that came in via Instagram. Recently, we have seen officers put in for, they're just concerned about how safe is it for officers to work 17 hours a day. It's just not sustainable. So I'm curious.
No, there are many officers that work that, yes. I don't have the exact number, but to answer your question, yes, many, especially during times of potential issues that that people are going to be needed. So, there's a lot of people that do that. Some willingly, and some, as we know, 22,000 hours not willingly. So,
Yeah, and so I'm trying to see this from all sides. I don't believe that every officer who earns overtime is doing so to con the system or stuff their little piggy banks, you know? It's expensive to live in Boston, and some officers are probably putting themselves in dangerous situations just because they're trying to earn enough money to get a house or keep their family here in Boston. But we really have to start looking at the system, because the system is not just hurting taxpayers, it's also hurting officers. And I think that working 17 hours a day is unhealthy and irresponsible, if you ask me, in terms of putting the safety of others in jeopardy. And then, so this question came from Instagram. Recently, we have seen some police officers put on leave for overtime violations. However, some of these officers have previously been placed on leave for earlier overtime/payroll violations. How many times does an officer need to violate the rules before they are fired?
I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, without specifics other than, officers, I don't know. But, they do have collective bargaining rights, and they also have, civil service protections. So, and then the employee protection. So, I mean, I can't really answer that because, the significance of the violation is more relevant than, like they say, they violated the 90-hour rule. Is that, something like that? That's really a minor, because 90 hours, they can only work 90 hours in a month. So if they go over 92, that's not really a significant infraction. So should they be fired? I don't know. I don't think so. But so unless I had more information, I can't really answer your question.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to just plant the seed because I see that gavel and I hate to be gavelled on. So I just wanted to quickly just say that when we come back, I'm curious to know in regards to the organizations that sit at this table in terms of protests. I want to know like the names of the groups that you mentioned, the titles, who are these folks? So maybe I can get answers to more specifics in terms of those folks who are at the table in terms of protests when it's my next round. Thank you so much.
But I'm not, just to answer, I don't attend those meetings, so I'm not exactly sure who does show up there.
So is there a way for us to, Lisa, and I'd like to hear more from Lisa too. I think that Lisa seems to be the keeper of a lot of data. So my next round questions, Lisa, you need to get a little bit of love, okay? So as much as I appreciate the superintendent, I need to hear from Lisa too. So next round, Lisa, it'll be all about you. So get ready, okay?
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Next up is Councilor Asabi George, and then it will be Councilor Flaherty. Councilors, oh, and I just want to note that we were joined a while back by Councilor Baker from District 3. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Super and Deputy Super and Lisa for being with us today to answer these questions. So I just as a quick follow-up, more of a statement following Councilor Mejia's questions, I think to avoid these mandated doubles that we hear a lot about, and we've had lots of conversations around for many, many years, we do need to make sure that we are right-sizing the police force, that we have enough police officers to respond to the needs of our communities and the requests across the city for appropriate coverage throughout the day, throughout a 24-hour block. I think that it's also important for us to think more strategically about what that formula is around staffing levels and around a response to other things happening in the city. In following up on some of Councilor Bach's questions and comments earlier, when we think about the number of police officers that are currently out sick and injured, we heard that it's a very high number at this point. Do we have any idea on the average time that an officer is out injured, and what are the supports and the tools that we put in place to help an officer be well, especially if it's a physical injury, and then what additional supports we have in place to support a police officer to get back to the job quickly, because we see that that's a place where we're running up additional hours across the board.
Yeah, so we do have those things in place. So we recently contracted with a medical group in Brighton that provides full services. This is on top of the occupational health unit. So we have medical staff in there providing, advice and suggestions, monitoring, so I mean, we provide them with everything that they need to get.
And I think that that's a new hire as of recent, or a new policy that's been put in place as of recent because of you didn't have the support services and the medical team in place in order to turn around some of that time. It would be nice maybe for the next hearing, because I know this came up in our previous hearing, to see if we've reaped any benefits from having that additional medical support on staff. I want to also get to some questions around the court overtime in particular. What is our relationship with the court system when we think about making sure that those proceedings are done efficiently and that we're not constantly recalling officers in to offer testimony and then cases get dismissed or extended or prolonged? I'm not sure what the legal term is. And then also, I think part of Councilor Arroyo's questions around the number of officers that are in court to offer testimony or whatever they do in court. I'm a high school teacher, not an attorney. Are we looking at all at, I'm imagining that crime happens more in the evening. I don't know that to be true. It's just my gut. And if an officer is involved in an incident that's happening either at night or overnight, that they would be off during the day to go to court, and that may account for some of those additional hours. So I just said a lot there. I think it's important for us to have a really close and working relationship with the courts so that we can be much more efficient with our time. I think that it's also important for the courts to be running in a way that we aren't recalling officers time and time again, that process is efficient. And I think that they're a missing partner in the work around some of that court overtime, some of those challenges. It's all of our tax dollars that we're discussing here. And then I wonder if there is any analysis done around when crime is happening over the time of day and how that impacts the expense with the court overtime in particular. Sorry, I know I laid a lot out there. Sorry about that. And I think
we do have relationships with the courts and the DA, so we try to minimize the number of officers that, the ones that are actually needed, and they do have discussions on who's needed and who isn't. And as far as doing analysis, the BRIC is always constantly doing analysis on everything that we do so we can address the emerging crime patterns. So, time, day, place, location, all the factors that go into that. So that is true. And then they supplement too. That's where some of the overtime, the discretionary overtime comes in. If they have like I said, an emerging crime pattern, they'll hire overtime to address that issue. So
I feel that Deputy Chin may have something to add to that.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. We're on Zoom, so I can't read body language as
okay. No, I was just gonna chime in about the court. So the night officers, to address what Councilor Arroyo was saying. So we have two shifts. We have the 4 to 11:45 shift, and then the 11:45 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. shift. That accounts for 2/3 of the officer, or 2/3 of the shifts. So if those officers make arrests and they are required to go to court, then yes, they would be going to court off duty, because their shift doesn't begin till 4 p.m. or 11:45 p.m. at night. So that may account for all those hours that you were speaking about. I was just thinking about that. And on the minimum manning is a very complicated formula, as the superintendent was saying earlier. It's a combination of a lot of factors like call volume, crime patterns, everything else. And, basically we have a number that we put on every shift that says that for public safety reasons, we have to have a certain number of officers on that shift in order to adequately staff that shift for public safety and officer safety. So a lot of those are different in every district based on call volume, crime patterns, A lot of the overtime, the additional overtime are, say if we have a serious crime in a certain area, we may actually add extra staffing for that shift so that we can address that uptick in crime. So we have a minimum manning number, and then we have a number that says, okay, well, all right, we have an uptick in this area or this zone. We're gonna add 2 more officers to that shift on overtime to address that particular problem. And it's very specific on all our deployments, and that's what the superintendent was talking about. Every week, it's always adjusted based on whatever we're seeing in crime statistics and things like that. And we base that on intelligence that we gather. So I don't know if that answers some of the questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's very helpful, and I won't ask additional questions, and because I see that my time is up. I will note that there's a formula, this minimum manning formula, perhaps that has to be revisited, but there is also considerable political pressure that you're under, that we're under, from community members saying there aren't enough police. Where are the police? We want to see more police. And then balancing that with what's happening sort of nationally around a national discussion, and where the right number is and where that right formula is. I don't have any additional questions. I don't know whether Lisa had something to add to that. Chair Bach, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you. Ms. O'Brien, did you have something there?
No, Counselor.
Okay, thank you. Then we're going to go to Councilor Flaherty, and then it'll be Councilor Baker. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the superintendent, just want to touch base on where we are with attrition. I know there's a big wave of retirements that are expected when the class size was a lot bigger than it had been in recent years. I think class sizes were in the 100, 110 range. So I know that there's a wave of men and women that are due to retire, and I just want to make sure that we're keeping up with attrition, and then obviously that has an impact on overtime as well. So wonder where we are with sort of minimum staffing levels and/or number of sworn personnel, and are we staying ahead of that, number one. 2, just want to touch base with respect to the court time, make sure that we're tracking when there are defaults, going back to my time in the DA's office, as well as on the defense bar. There's a little bit of a game that's played, particularly around motion to suppress time and/or a trial time, where when all the officers show up that are summoned to be there, and then they do a little sort of duck and hide in the parking lot, and then when the case is called, and then the judge issues a default, but prior to it, the warrant entering into the system, lo and behold, the defendant walks in and talks about car trouble or the train was running late, etc. So then they immediately remove the default, and then they set a new date, and then that's the same officers being summoned in again. That happens a lot in our district courts, where officers are being summoned multiple times for the same case, because there's a little bit of a cat and mouse game that goes on there with the more savvy, the more court savvy defendants, and that is a factor as well, driving up the cost. Clearly, it's not going to sort of matter right now because a lot of the courts are either closed and/or we're starting, arrested down, and some of the custodies are down just in light of COVID. And then lastly, if the police department would hopefully will go on record with respect to having chiropractic services added to the formulary for municipal employees, that will go a long way in getting men and women back to the job quicker if they have the ability to go to a chiropractor for an adjustment and get right back to work, as opposed to primary care, to the specialist, to the physical therapist, the Flexerol, to maybe worse than that, and then we get this endless cycle. So the sooner we get chiropractic services on the formulary as part of our buying power as municipal employees, and it'd be great if the police department weighs in on that and joins in that chorus to get chiropractic services for the men and women of the police department to get them back to work quicker. That we'll see a significant cost savings in lost man hours and time off due to injury. So those are just 3 matters through the chair to the superintendent.
Okay, Counselor. So we do have, like I said, scheduled coming up for next year, about 156 retirements. And we have about 160 officers for fiscal year 21. I don't know what 22 is going to bring, but So we'll end up with about a net of 4. So, you know, we're doing the best we can. That's about where we are with that. As far as the chiropractors, I think that's a great idea because we're doing everything we can to help our officers get back to, you know, physically and mentally be the best they can be on the job. So I will definitely bring that to our medical staff and we can explore those possibilities. There was one other question?
Yeah, it was on the, so on the court time, are we tracking defaults in terms of when officers get summoned into court, they show up, they're ready to go, defendant does not appear, officers are released, and then lo and behold, who walks through the door? The defendant, and who arguably in some instances waited for the officers to be released and then shows up, and then they remove the default, and then they schedule another court date. It could be a motion to suppress, or it could be a trial date. And then those officers are re-summoned in again, and then they get another 4. And that happens all the time throughout the district courts, not throughout just the Commonwealth, but let's specifically talk about Suffolk County in general. That happens pretty regularly on a day-to-day basis. A little cat and mouse game that goes on that cost us, obviously, the city and taxpayers significant money, particularly when a number of officers are being summoned in. They're getting their 4. Case gets called, second call, default, they're released, only to have to get another summons several days later for a rescheduled hearing. So that's significant, and I just want to make sure that we're tracking that as well.
We don't, but I mean, we do on paper because they have the right to disposition when they sign out of court, but we don't electronically have that. So I don't think we have a way of analyzing that at this point. Maybe it's something we should really look into.
Maybe we can get the district attorney in that conversation because we don't have any control of that. So we're at the mercy of, you know, the judges, the jury, Council Flaherty, you know how that works, right? Like, you know, maybe they don't have a jury in that day and they might release the officers and they may summons them again on a different day. So there are a lot of other underlying factors that affect us in particular because we have no control over that. Like you said, the defendant walks in the door at, you know, noontime after the officers were released at 11. He was marked default. We don't know that he came in at 12. So a lot of the officers will just assume that, okay, he defaulted. That's why they got re-summons.
Right. And I agree. And my point is, obviously, if we're tracking this information, as we peel back the onion, there are those situations, and they're pretty significant, whether there's not enough jurors or there's no jury session that day and or there's defaults. All of that adds to this issue of overtime for the Boston Police Department, along with state and MBTA, of course.
Exactly. So I guess, you know, that's part of the challenge is to find out if we can somehow track that, because that's only on the district attorney's case files. Because like I said, once our officers leave the court, we have no idea that the defendant walked in.
I agree. So I just think that if we're going to be looking at this more closely and we're asking for more transparency on it, I just think that it's fair. It's fair to recognize there are situations that are, I guess, beyond Boston Police control. When they show up, they're summoned, so they're on court time, and obviously it's the 1 for 4, and they're getting paid for 4. There are instances when they serve, they participate in the motion to suppress, and or they serve in a trial, or there are instances where there's defaults, and they're pretty voluminous within the district courts pretty regularly, and also there are times when the court may not have a judge. The jury session might have been canceled. There may not be enough jurors, whatever. There's a whole variety of things that I just think that if we're going to be looking closely at this in fairness, those factors need to be factored in as well.
Oh, I definitely agree with you, but we have to bring those other factors to the table, like the district attorney or the judges, and have that discussion with them.
So, Councilor, as we're moving to we're trying to move to the overtime slips electronically. So maybe we could consider, if we can get that done, we can consider a disposition of each case. So then we can do the analysis. You know, like we we don't necessarily need to know that they came back in at noon, but we could write disposition when the officer walked out default. And so we could track that.
Right. Yeah, particularly in cases where on multiple occasions, officers were summoned in on the same case, you know, and obviously the case starts to have, start to collect some dust, if you will. And, you know, that's just important because it just, that's added cost to the taxpayers.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty, you all set?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you.
Great. Okay, I think, and Councilor Baker had to step away for a moment, so I think we're going back up to the top for further questions. So
Madam Chair, if I may.
Oh, Council President Cheney, you're back. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Council President Cheney, you have the floor.
Thank you. And just briefly, I did have to step away. I apologize. And I feel like I was stepping away at a really good time in terms of some of the information you were going through the slide presentation, but I had to take a couple of calls. So I apologize if these questions have been already answered or discussed. I am really interested in where we are in terms of electronic files. I hear, you know, I've heard that we're moving. I want to get a real sense of what is happening and when we might get there.
You know, we're doing our best, Counselor. We're just trying to, you know, as these issues, these unexpected issues present themselves, you know, unfortunately, like we can have a baseline, and that's basically what it is, a baseline number for policing services. But these unexpected events which occur, whether it's rising crime or these, you know, whatever, right? The demonstrations or presidential elections, you know, they have an effect on, you know, our numbers. And also, like the previous council was asking about, you know, the working over the double shifts. I mean, all this is all has to be considered as they come our way. We can't.
Yeah, I can appreciate. Let me just clarify the question. My question is about a system in place that is now electronic. So when might we have that in place? Is that the end of the calendar year, the end of the fiscal year?
Yeah, so that involves many, you know, city agencies. So we are in the middle of discussing that because, you know, we get a lot of requests for overtime analysis from outside agencies. And for us to, every time our payroll division has to go through each box of paperwork, it's too cumbersome. If it was electronically, it would be a lot easier for all these analysis to occur. So this is something we want, but you know, I think it's just going to take some time here. To answer your question, I don't know, but this is something we definitely want.
So when you say we're trying to go electronically, is there then an RFP that's out here? We're looking to get a vendor to come. It doesn't, I'm not clear as what trying to go electronically really means.
Well, we're in the early discussions with Do It and other city agencies. So, yeah, this is just, you know, we've been trying to move to this for a little bit now. And it's, you know,
might there be information that we could collect? So I did catch the tail end of Councilor Flaherty's questions around defaults at court. So it sounds to me like people are getting paid overtime twice. They show up, they're going to get their minimum 4 hours. The defendant comes in after the officers have been dismissed. Now the officers have to show up to court on another date again. So they're going to get those now they're going to get 8 hours instead of the 4 hours. So one, I know you can't control when that happens because you can't control defendants or the need for a new trial to happen. But I wonder what we can control is the information that we're collecting. What we can do is have a better sense of how often that is happening by the information that we collect. So I wonder just through these discussions that you guys are having internally, because I saw the first bullet point on the slide deck, it said, you know, looking at overtime hours, right? Yep. And my question is like, well, whose responsibility is it to do just that? Who's looking at the overtime? Is there a designated person within the department?
No, so that the information is compiled and it's viewed by like all the department heads and district commanders. So, and they review it at
I
each
guess
meeting. So
I don't mean to cut you off. I know that gavel is coming any minute, and I know there's a lot of interest to get to a second and third round of questions from my colleagues, particularly the maker. But I'm curious because we started this conversation and the chairwoman put out some data points with numbers of who was injured and sick in 2017, 2018, 2019, and then we saw that huge spike. But it seemed to catch us all by surprise in this conversation. So my hope is that there's someone internally in the Boston Police Department who saw that and is immediately trying to peel back the onion and understand why we saw that big jump in 2016 on the hurt and injured list, understanding that that's going to impact overtime, the need for overtime. And so if we're really trying to monitor and look at it, I'm trying to understand who within the department is really.
That is my job. So what happens, so there's a lot of factors that go into that 216. So as the numbers diminish, you know, our overall numbers, so there's more demands on the police officers and, you know, the aging police force. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that get into this, and it's increased. And this is before the COVID. So, you know, to get into what there wasn't like one incident. It's just an accumulation of multiple factors that is causing the rise. And you know, and there's other factors that cause like that number, because I don't want to stop pointing fingers, but you know, some of these people should be retired, and it's difficult getting them retired to get them off the books, which would lower that number, because some of them are injured, they're not coming back. They're injured that significantly. So it's you know, and a lot of them want to leave. It's just they get caught in that limbo. So there's many different aspects of that, Counselor.
Yeah, I see the gavels coming up. I would be interested in understanding that limbo and how we kind of untangle some of that, because if officers are trying to retire and they should retire because they're not coming back, shame on us if we can't get them cut through this red tape within the city.
We were working hard on that, Counselor.
Okay. All right, I see the gavel. I will reserve my time. I see the makers of this hearing order anxious to get back in. If I am still on the call for the second round, I'm happy to jump back in. Thank you, Chairwoman Bach. And thank you to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Yeah, so we're back up at the top. I will ask a few more questions and set myself the timer. So I guess one thing I wanted to talk about that we haven't really turned to yet is the details. So you guys put up that slide that of sort of the number of details claimed and not claimed. And so when I look at that, it looks like 53% of our details are not claimed. And so am I right in understanding that the work then just goes forward without somebody assigned to it?
That's correct.
And I guess, you know, I think there's a very real question amongst many of our community advocates about, you know, the opportunity for civilian flaggers to cover those unfilled details, since obviously it's an opportunity for work that the utilities and the private developers and others are obligated to pay for. Has the department or, you know, the administration more broadly thought about that at all?
I would say not at this point.
Okay, well, I think I just like to say, I think that's a conversation that the council will want to have going forward. I also wanted to ask the detail. So obviously the detail system, the data that you gave us suggested that, you know, and I think, is it 32 officers we have who are administering the detail system?
Yes.
Was it 32? Yep. So I know in our hearing in July, we talked about in general, in terms of a long-term structural way to bring down some of these overtime costs, and particularly the replacement costs. that getting sworn officers off of the kind of desk work like assigning details and into the more direct police work might help with that. And so I'm concerned about that number of officers on the detail distribution system for that reason. I'm also just concerned. So if it's costing us $3.8 million to operate the detail assignment system, I know we get a 10% bonus for the department on top of the reimbursement for the pay for officers' hours worked. When I looked back at last year, it looked like in our pay data, like we'd paid people about $31 million in detail pay, which suggested to me that the department would have gotten something like $3.1 million, although I think the number I saw in terms of what we actually got was lower, probably because the reimbursement's not perfect. So I guess just is the department thinking about whether it makes sense to have that many sworn officers in this role, and also whether consolidating that could make it so that we're not actually spending money on the detail system?
Yeah, those are all part of the collective bargaining system. So right now it's where we are with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, previewing coming attractions. I guess on that broader civilianization question. So when you guys were here in July, you talked about how to have a sort of bigger structural plan for cutting this overtime budget. And I think it's worth noting that a bunch of the things that have given us reductions, it looks like in Q1, some of them are pretty circumstantial, right? So like the courts are down 77%. The courts are many not operating in their normal capacity. I think that I think technically, am I right, Super, that crime is down overall? I know that's not consistent across all categories, but.
Yep, it's down 4% overall. And also leading to that is arrests are down overall too, 37%. So they've had up year to date 5,000 arrests, which normally 5-year average is 9,500. So that
right.
would mean the court time is reduced.
Right. So that also reduces court time. So it seems like, so you've got courts down because of the COVID situation, you've got crime down and then arrest down. And then you've also got, although
a lot of that crime down though, Counselor, is, so we have residential burglary is down, obviously, because there's more people home, but commercial burglary, because no one's at work, is up 78%. So, the homicide, which is up significantly, all of crimes that you would think that, so one larceny from a motor vehicle, that's up 26%. But other than that, the like other larceny is down 16%. Total larceny is up 7%. Auto theft is up 7%. So just those are some of the factors that are occurring.
Right. So it's very variable across the categories. And I guess my question though is, then when we turn to special events, right, we've got that almost 20,000 hours of officer overtime logged in relation to protests. But then because so many events have been canceled, that's compared to, there's only another 4,000 or 5,000 in addition to that that's in that category. And then we're up almost to 40,000 hours at the same time last year. So overall, we've had a big reduction in the special events line. Yep. And so I guess because of that, my concern is when I think about sort of structurally decreasing this budget, a lot of the things that we've benefited from so far are contingent situational things. And so it makes me even more interested in when the department came in July and said, there's probably 97 positions across the department that are held by sworn officers that are kind of desk positions and could be civilianized in the long term. And I just want to know what sort of progress you guys are making on that and what that looks like.
Well, again, public safety is because of everything that's been occurring. I know courts down, but other significant are occurring in the COVID. So to make some of those changes, probably not at the best time to do that. And we're hoping in the future that, as now that the winter months are coming, because crime, events start to diminish. So we're hoping to revisit that and see where we stand with that. But right now, we're just kind of trying to catch our breath and move forward with everything that's occurring externally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really think we have to be thinking at a structural level to really, I mean, as I said at the start, we're not on target for the broader level of cuts that you're right, to get to the 48 million. And then my last thing, because I know I want to move to my colleagues, is just, I mean, I think Deputy Superintendent Chin brought up, there are manning numbers. You guys are adjusting them, but they are spread across. And I just think that's information that the council is requesting, is like to understand what our minimum manning levels default look like across the city. And one of the questions that I get all the time is, how does, people see on the BPD Twitter all these traffic stops, and folks are like, well, how does that, how do people getting assigned to do that work? How does that factor in with minimum manning? And I think
what are you saying on Twitter? I'm not really following you.
Oh, no, it's just BPD will often tweet about traffic stops that have resulted in a gun confiscation or something. And folks are trying to understand how those, and how kind of just in general, folks who are out doing FIOs get assigned, how that relates to minimum manning and how that's additional and separate. And all of that, of course, relates to resources.
Yeah, there's no connection there with that, but I don't know if so whatever they tweeted, maybe they had information that particular vehicle was carrying, some people with some weapons, and they, that could have been the district officers that are just working their regulatory duty. I mean,
so there are people assigned to traffic stop work.
No, well, there are some people assigned to that. Yes, one person basically each. So that person basically responds to the community requests, and plus the traffic analysis where accidents are occurring, pedestrian struck, motor vehicle accident involving pedestrians, but and then complaints from the community service officers that they'll say certain intersection or location, speed, whatever the issue is. So that's generally one person. They call that the tango car. But no, like a crime, like any officer, if you have information that someone is carrying a weapon, that they could stop that vehicle. So as long as it's good information, whatever, you have a reasonable suspicion.
Right. No, I understand that. I was just saying that I think there's a desire across the public and the council for greater transparency on how our resources are allocated across the city. And it does seem like the department does have these minimum manning numbers for the different districts and places. So I think I want to continue to pursue that information for the council, but I've used my time. I want to go on to my colleague, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, it's obviously been listening to this hearing, and I still have a lot of questions, but I know time is going to run out. I'm sure all of us have conflict. So one of the things through you, chairs, that I really want to do, and I think you'll probably agree, is the long list of questions that we got from folks in the advocacy world and other residents who care about this issue. If we could just submit those written questions to the department for written responses. I think there were I want to say maybe 25 or 30 questions. So through you, would love to send that to get written responses, which I think is more efficient. And then on a follow-up, so clearly the goal has been, and since I joined the council, we've been talking about BPD's overtime being absorbent and continuing to go up, while also understanding, one, yes, we want to maintain obviously public safety and protecting our residents, but how do we wrap our head around a strategy and a response that will allow us to do that while saving taxpayer dollars? And a commitment in the last budget cycle to realize a percentage of savings, based on what I'm hearing today, doesn't look like we're actually going to actualize that commitment, which I think is concerning. But it raises the larger issue of if we can't realize the short-term goal in actualizing that commitment, there's no way long-term we're going to be able to do anything with respect to our overtime budget that is sustainable over long-term period of time. And so, I still have questions as to how we are going to realize that commitment. I don't think it's been answered throughout the hearing. I know there are concerns from you, superintendent, and others. I get that, but then the question still remains, well, how, with those concerns, do we honor that commitment that we made to folks publicly? And I want to also say that maybe my council colleagues committed to voting for a budget thinking that we would actually actualize those savings. So I think it's just critically important that we figure that out. And then the long-term strategy. I know we have the separate hearing, Councilor Bach, in partnership with Councilor Edwards, on the bargaining, the 4-hour minimum, all of that. I think why we pushed for that hearing is because we wanted a commitment from the administration as to what is their advocacy going to look like at that table with respect to abolishing 4-hour minimum, or any conversation with respect to that, or capping overtime. So I'm still I don't even know. My questions are still the same. What is the short-term strategy and long-term strategy to get there? One point of clarification on the capping, if we were to cap overtime, is that a conversation that also needs to happen at the bargaining table? Or is that separate? It's something separate that the commissioner and the department could do on their own?
You mean the number of hours an officer can work in a day or in a month?
Right, whether it's capping, our overtime budget, capping the amount of overtime, then capping our overtime budget. Is that possible without going through the collective bargaining agreement?
Um,
The 4-hour minimum, I get that. That's a provision in the
As far as
agreement.
the number of hours an officer, well, the other thing, I mean, is it possible? I have to look into that. I have to talk to the my labor people, but we don't want to minimize our ability to provide the services. So if we say we capped it to 12 hours a day, they do your 8-hour shift and 4 hours overtime, that might significantly impact our ability to adequately staff the number of officers needed to, respond to incidents. So that's a balance. That number is a good balance between that would develop between the officers and the department. So, and the mental and physical health people also had weighed in.
Right, but Superintendent, I do think it gets to the whole point of these hearings, right, is striking the balance between public safety and then, of course, reducing our $70+ million overtime budget.
Yep.
So it's going to be a balancing act this entire way, short-term solutions, long-term, it's all a balancing act. And so I think, for me, it's just a clarification on what can we be pushing as a department without going through collective bargaining, what has to go through collective bargaining, which means we have to continue to have that separate conversation and hearing on those issues. But at some point, while striking this balance, we need to start committing to various things that will reduce this number. And I think that's the part that's confusing, is we keep talking about it, whether it's reorganization, hiring more officers, whatever it is, there's not been any commitments. And so that's the part that's been really tough to swallow, because obviously with certain tasks that the department wasn't called to do this year, we've been able to actualize some savings. So I'm going to follow up with some more questions through you, Chair. There'll be questions I ask in this hearing, hoping that we get a commitment and a response. But I do think if we continue to just have these hearings, we're in just sort of talking in circles, we're not going to get anywhere. And I say that with all due respect, but I feel like this is just a continuation of the July hearing.
One thing we are committed to is public safety and officer safety. So that's herein lies the problem. I mean, we need to, or the solution has to lie in there, because, the residents of Boston, like, they depend on us. And, when they call 911, they have an expectation that we're going to be coming.
No, I totally get that. And I think that, whether it's Council O'Malley, we bring up solutions and ideas we're seeing in other cities, or even some of our own officers suggesting some reorganization that will help get district coverage. I think the challenge is there's different conversations and ideas out there. whether or not there's a commitment or a willingness to try any of these things out is the remaining question. And I see the gavel is waving.
Well, you mentioned other cities, so we'll take up Minneapolis. I read an article the other day that they actually moved to these, massive cuts. Now, with the increased crime, they're trying to contract officers from outside their district. So they have a plan. They have to hire an additional, I think it was 130 officers, 150 officers just to maintain their minimal level. So, I mean, it's something that, we should be cognizant of, but talking about other departments. So.
No, I know. I absolutely agree. And I think, I also want to stress this point, which we all have been stressing. I'm going to end here, Councilor Bach, that the whole point of having these conversations too is that police alone, of course, cannot solve all the violence issues. It just can't happen. And the point of having these conversations about overtime and pulling in resources somewhere else is to look at how do we fund other programs, other initiatives that get at the economics, that get at poverty, that get at social programming, in order to really address the root causes of violence, right? So that we see those numbers go down and not up. There's clearly a public health pandemic, an economic devastation going on in communities of color that may be a trigger, right, to what we're seeing in terms of some of the incidents of violence. Hence, why we're pushing for these resources to go to the root causes of violence as well, to couple that with the work that our police do every single day. Why these conversations are so critically important. So, Madam Chair, through you, I will submit a whole host of questions to the department for response, and we'll continue to push for just greater commitment. Otherwise, we're going to literally see this overtime budget, I think, continue to go up. We may realize some savings, we won't realize what we committed to, and nothing will have changed.
So, Councilor, so we're at 17.9, which is almost 20%, right? So, which is significant. So, one aspect of our response is because we hear we hear the council, we hear that there are people that are advocating for more police, but one issue is the over policing. So, because over the years they've come to rely on us for everything. So we're working with other city agencies, as an example, alternative solutions, right? We're working with the BTD, who have generously stepped up to the plate under the direction of Mayor Walsh to start, taking their part of the pie and handling those issues so that the police aren't handling because right now we handle every single issue. Everything. So we're trying to push back, give people what they need to handle, because the reason is we handle it because you call 911, guess what? We're coming. So people become to rely on us for every issue, whether it's plumbing, parking, dogs barking, whatever. So we're trying to push.
Understood, and hence why this, I think, is such a critical conversation on how we get resources and investments to all these other agencies, all these other initiatives, community-based organizations included, to be able to respond more effectively to these issues. So
we'll gladly give it up, Councilor. We'll gladly give it all up. The other thing is we talk, alternative policing. We're working with the mayor's office and Deputy Stratton, who couldn't make this meeting today, about the best team and alternative policing solutions. We mentioned it in July about cahoots and modified cahoots. We talked to Austin Police. So we're trying to, and this takes time, but we're exploring every avenue to get the police out of every aspect. We don't need to be in every aspect of society. We agree with you. We're 100%. And if we can achieve this, that will reduce our overtime.
Yep. I see the gavel. Bye. And I'll follow up with questions, including around minimum manning positions. Thank you, Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell and Superintendent. Next up is Councilor O'Malley, then it's Councilor Arroyo, and then Councilor Braden and Flynn. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm just going to sort of delve into the weeds a little bit more. So Soup or whomever, I'm going to go into some of the attachments that we received late this morning, starting with data request part 3, the Excel spreadsheet. And I'm looking at the second tab that says detail recommendations or detail received maybe. Now that I see it's just REC. And it shows and I'm sorry, I've got my screen off because I'm looking at this spreadsheet, so I'm hopeful everyone's on it or finding it. But it's about Boston Police paid details, open receivables. So I guess it's detail receivables, and looking at a significant amount of money that would appear to be still owed to us for the last fiscal year. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
Correct. Lisa, they want to hear from Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa.
That is correct. That is correct.
So thanks, Lisa. So if I'm reading it right, FY 16, 17, and 18, it says all fully funded. So all of those costs were eventually paid?
No, they're still outstanding, but the amounts have been reserved for uncollectible debt.
So
we reserve if we have to write those off, Counselor. So we set up a reserve in the event that and if we write them off, the amounts that get written off get charged back to our operating budget under detail expense under salary. So we reserve for them just in the event that we can't collect. However, my position is if I know that vendor's a viable vendor out there and they're not paying, we'll still do cold calling emails to try to get them to pay. And my team and the detail unit at headquarters does a tremendous amount of job. I mean, if you saw these receivables back in 2013 when we converted the balance over to the city's books, it was extremely high, and they've done great efforts to get these balances down. And the only time that we would write off a balance in the event that a company went bankrupt or went out of business, and I think they also work with the city's Treasury Department on those issues with how maybe we could get like any kind of, if there's a settlement of an estate, how we could get a portion of those that settlement.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And I think we touched upon this briefly during the last hearing. So this is, I think, an opportunity for us to identify potentially, $1 million, $1.5 million, as much as, or 1.3 million that's currently outstanding to us. So the total amount looking at it, if I'm reading this, is 1.3 million, and that's 1.1 million of detail cost and about 164,000 of administrative cost. So that admin cost, is that civilian administered, or is that?
That's the 10% admin fee that we collect on invoicing the vendor. I did want to point out when Councilor Block was talking about the administration fee being a little bit less than the calculation, some companies are not paid aren't responsible for the administrative fee. So for example, if I'm working on a state job and it's really the state's paying that vendor, it's a municipality to municipality that we don't charge the admin fee because it's a state job. So we don't charge other municipalities that admin fee.
And I assume there's reciprocity, they wouldn't for us as well?
Correct. It's actually the law.
Gotcha. And does that include like a quasi-public agency like the Boston Water and Sewer Commission?
No, Boston Water and Sewer Commission does pay an admin fee. Okay. However, if they are working on a state job for the state and they have a state contract ID, we don't charge them that admin fee. Because the state won't reimburse Boston Water and Sewer for that admin fee. Okay.
And again, the admin fee, is the 10%. I'm more concerned about the 90%, but this is some helpful context. So talk to me very briefly, like who are these vendors that owe the city $1.3 million? Give me examples of, you don't have to get into specifics, but I'm assuming it's utility companies. I'm assuming it's
contractors. Some of them are, believe it or not, some private vendors for whatever reason just failed to pay their bill. We actually even offer a collection plan if that's what it takes for them to pay back. I don't have the aging receivable in front of me, so I can't give you any specific vendors. I know that the utility companies are great in paying, but sometimes they're staggered and they're delayed when they pay as a result of getting reimbursement from other units because it's considered project management. So it's all like internally. So they do a job, they're waiting for reimbursement from other units within their organization, but the utilities do pay. I could definitely provide with
I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to be super mindful of our time. And the point I'm trying to get here is a way that hopefully we can be helpful, because I think this is a lot of money left on the table. I think you recognize it. I think your colleagues have been doing some good work calling through. But do we have any, is there any restrictions? If you owe tens of thousands of dollars to the city of Boston that you don't pay?
Oh, we suspend the accounts if the only issue that it becomes is that, and we've been working with City Hall and they've been great to try to have a process in place that if I'm going to pull a permit up at City Hall in ISD, we need some systems talking to each other to flag it, to say, Councilor O'Malley owes money, we're not going to issue him a permit. If they get issued a permit to dig and it becomes a public safety issue that we need a police officer because of the intersection in which they're digging, we really can't refuse that detail to them.
Yeah.
Because it poses a public safety like, so for example, in front of Brigham and Women's, even if that vendor doesn't pay, we're not going to put a detail down there because it poses a huge risk to the public. If there is not a detail.
The other thing they do is, they're slick also. What they do is, so today they come in as the Superintendent Hassan Construction. Tomorrow they come in as Lisa O'Brien's Construction.
Yeah, I mean, we actually even have a list with Boston Water and Sewer, and they've been great with us too, communicating back and forth. Like they have I think it's probably just a sticky note on someone's desk to say, Councilor O'Malley, you owe money. We're not gonna issue you the permit to dig. And and they do come back to us, the vendors, and we'll put them on a payment plan. We'll take $100 a month if that's what it takes for them to start paying, but then they fall off to the wayside again.
No,
but it's really not the bigger companies, it's the smaller companies. Like Super said, we had one company, a construction company, the minute we shut him off because he owed over $400,000, he ended up under a different name, his initials, but it was under the same taxpayer ID, and we got him, but it's just tough.
Yeah. So I think two things I'll end on that is I appreciate that. And I think that you've underscored the need for better coordination of information. This is something I've been pushing as it relates to when a street is opened for a gas leak to be filled, or when work is done and we know there are active gas leaks. We should have better coordination. So I think that's one way we can follow up with do it. But I think the second thing is, oftentimes people will say it's okay to have all these detailed accounts because they're paid for privately. And while that is the case sometimes, quite often, particularly when you talk about a utility or water and sewer quasi-public agency, the ratepayer is still paying for it. And this point further underscores that sometimes no one's paying for it at all and the money still has to come through. So the department has to sort of proactively, I forget the word you use, but fully fund it when in fact it hasn't been. So I think it shows the complicated system here. So I stand ready to work with you and work with the city to make sure that we can collect the money that is rightfully owed to us and has been owed to us for a number of years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Arroyo, and then it'll be Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to take us back to where we were about an hour ago on the court OT, namely that you have to be off duty to receive it. You asked for names. In 2017, the Boston Globe wrote an article called, the title of which was, "For Some Boston Officers, Extra Money Comes Easy." They documented Detective Wayman Lee, who's in the domestic violence unit, specifically that he had logged about 2,771 hours from detail shifts, and that most of his overtime pay stemmed from court appearances that typically lasted no more than an hour. When you jump to now, present tense, 2019, that was 2017, he spent 245 individual days in court that he received overtime pay for, 245. How is it possible that he is off duty 245 days? The courts are only open about 245 to 260 days, which means almost every day he was in court receiving pay for OT, he was allegedly off duty. And so the question is, at that point, it seems like going to court is a pretty regular part of his duty. Why isn't that being scheduled for the portion of his day when he is on duty? How is that explained? And then similarly, I know he's in the domestic violence unit. Similarly, Richard Moy, who's in the domestic violence unit, another detective, 204 days in which he was off duty in court receiving pay, 204 days. And so I'm just trying to figure out how it is possible for somebody to be in court almost every day that it is open on working and functional with no vacations and no weekends, and it's always seemingly when he's off duty. How is that possible?
Well, he works the 4 to 12 shift, number one. And I'm not really sure about the other detective.
4 to 12 shift, or if 4
What's
to
that?
11. If he's
4 to
in
11:45. He works the 4 to 11:45, but like you said, he's in the domestic violence. And I think, if I remember correctly, because kind of, cold calling me here, but I think he handles over 1,000 cases a year. So it's not inconceivable for him to be, because as you know, the domestic violence cases are the most sensitive of cases that a court will handle because it involves the family, and he needs to be there to provide the guidance and the present the evidence to the court on behalf of the victim. So it's like that person.
I've actually had cases with Detective Lee when I was a public defender, where what we received was called the Family Justice Pack, which I think is actually, as a attorney, I think it's a decent thing. It's basically every police report that includes both of those folks. So the complainant and the defendant. Every police report that cites them, it comes in a packet. And my understanding was that what he was doing, or what the detective was doing, or others in the agency were doing, where they were dropping that packet off, that's a packet that, if that is the case, that is a packet that should just be Dropboxed to Gmailed. Any other way you can reach that, faxed, however you want to get that to a district attorney. It doesn't require an in-presence. Frankly, and this is, you don't have to respond to this, but as an attorney, there's very few things pre-trial that anybody would have to show up for court to do. Rarely. I mean, we're talking about testimony and evidence, right? Those are really the two things where you would need an officer for motion hearing, for court prep, if they're going to give testimony, for trial. And I think part of the thing that I'm sort of flagged by is, we're down in court time, but that's because the courts are down. The courts they're not open to the same functionality that they were previously. I don't think there's been trials. I don't think we have juries. And so that's a built-in part of COVID right now, that our court overtime would be down. And so I'm going to just move from that to sort of this court overtime process. In order to receive court overtime, an officer has to be summoned, correct?
Yep.
And then they arrive to court, and there's somebody who's called the court supervisor.
Yep.
Is the court supervisor an employee of BPD?
Yes.
So it's a Boston police officer who is the court supervisor?
A sergeant. Yep.
Okay. And so then they sign in with that sergeant.
They sign it, correct.
And that's on paper.
Yes.
And then they stay for however long their court appearance is, and they come back and they sign out with that sergeant?
Correct.
On paper?
Yep.
And then they receive a court overtime sort of receipt or slip that's also on paper?
Correct.
Okay. And then they finally take that piece of paper and they put an electronic request for money because they have to get paid. So they have to put that, that's when it becomes electronic, when they take that court slip and they make a request from the city for that time that they worked.
Well, they send up the paper form up to the payroll, and then the payroll will do the data entry into the city system, correct?
Okay. And in the year 2020, why is that process not automated? Why is that process done by paper?
Very good question.
Do we have an answer for that, or is it? I mean,
so the answer is, like I said to the president of the council, is it's something we would like to do, but unfortunately, like just because I would like it to happen, doesn't mean everyone's going to drop what they're doing. Oh, the police department showed up. There's so many other priorities. So we've had discussions with this on this issue, but unfortunately, there are other serious priorities that are occurring, and something like, that's a great idea.
What do we do with all this paper?
What's
How
that?
many years back do we keep court overtime slips?
I think 7.
Okay, and
Could be 3. Could be 3. Counselor. Could be 3. Could be 3. Could be 7. I'm not really sure.
7 to 3. Okay, and I see the gavel, so I'm going to try and end it here. But the court supervisor, who supervises them?
So again, we just implemented a new position. Well, not new any longer. About a year or so ago, Superintendent Marcus Eddings, and he's trying to institute policy. And this is one of his top agendas, trying to
Is it fair to,
modernize this. What's that?
so it's fair to say he supervises the court supervisors?
He does. Oh, yeah, that's fair to say.
When's
He
the last
definitely does.
time there was, how regularly scheduled do you audit these court overtime records?
He would
Well,
have
not-
to answer that question. What's
Do you
that?
ever audit the court overtime?
Yeah, we audit a lot of different things. You know, again, priorities. So I know we have in the past when issues are arisen, but do we? I can't answer that question.
Well,
But I know with him, like I would say yes, because he's very meticulous and you know, detail oriented. So
Okay, but you don't know officially.
I don't know the answer to that. No.
I'll have one more round after this on this, and I think I might be able to get into one round. Thank you, Kenzie.
Great.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Okay, next it's going to be Councilor Flynn and then Councilor Mejia. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Bach, and apologize. I was on another call earlier with Chinatown residents. So I don't want to ask questions that may have been asked already. I guess my point is, it may not have been covered here, but over the last year, during this pandemic, we saw a lot of police working overtime. But I'm also concerned about, you know, their time off as well, making sure that they have enough time off so that they have health and wellness is also an important issue for police and their families. You know, what they went through the last 10 months, you know, is like being on a deployment for the military. And when this pandemic's over, I think a lot of police and their families will you know, need more time off. So I think it's critical that we look at, you know, hiring more police officers. I know we're considering that again, but I think with the retirements coming up, 400, 500 new police officers is needed. I just wanted to see what your thoughts might be, Superintendent. And again, thank you for your leadership on all these issues.
No, first of all, I have to agree with you, Councilor, that these officers deserve to be commended for the work and the dedication and the commitment, because that's what it is. Because what the demands that they've been put under over the last since March have been unforeseen and incredible. But you know, obviously, we think that, you know, we'd like to maintain our level of police officers at the 2250, but you know, budgetary constraints obviously make that determination. So you know, I just have to say, I have to agree with you on both aspects of your question.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. Thank you to the Deputy Superintendent. And the only reason I bring that issue up is I was on 2 deployments for 12 months each, different times. It takes you years to bounce back from a deployment. It's not like when you come back from a deployment, everything is fine. So I think it's really important that us as city councilors support the police for their health and wellness is also a critical part of this discussion. And we need to be engaged in making sure we advocate for time off for police to make sure that they are able to engage with their medical provider, their mental health provider, and making sure that their children and families are all set. And I think that's going to be an important issue going forward. I just want to say thank you to my colleagues. Thank you, Councilor Bach, and to the Superintendent and the Deputy Superintendent, and to Lisa O'Brien as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Next up, Councilor Mejia, and then it'll be Councilor Asabi George. Councilor Mejia.
Thank you. So I just have a few questions, and I can't do so without just stating some of the obvious things. Is that, you know, a lot of people are looking to us and are looking at us right now to ensure that we do the right thing. And I'm sure that they can't believe what we're hearing right now, that we have incorrect data. We're using jails as treatment centers, and overtime slips are still being processed on paper. And I think that we have an opportunity to really figure out how we can right these wrongs. And so one of the proposals to cut down on overtime is to use the Suffolk County's House of Corrections as a service agency / treatment center. And I just want to call out and express that we should not be putting people who have not been arraigned in jail. I don't know if that is the best way to handle the situation. The last hearing that we had on overtime in July, in September, we found out that 9 current and former BPD officers have been charged in overtime fraud scheme. And my question is, what actions have you all taken since then to prevent overtime fraud? Just really curious about what you've learned and what you have done as a result of that. According to the data that was sent out for court appearance overtime, we paid, I believe, 3,891 hours of overtime that were never worked. And so what is what's the dollar figure for that overtime amount? I'm just curious. And then in your PowerPoint presentation, you mentioned increased communication as a commitment to overtime reduction. And I'm curious about how you're communicating, who are you communicating with, and how is the BPD communicating with members of the public on how they're making these changes. So when we talk about accountability and transparency, I'm just really curious about how this information is being shared with the general public, and how you're engaging folks in these conversations. So I know I asked a lot, but I'm hoping that we can find some answers.
Do you want Lisa to answer that?
Of course I do.
I can answer it.
No, come on, let her speak.
Unless you're sick of hearing from me, which I don't blame you. But
listen, I need, I would like to hear from Lisa too. I know you got a lot to say, but I know she had a really good command of that PowerPoint. And so I'd love to hear from her.
So
you both can answer. I'm just teasing.
So let me just take the policing and she could take, so as far as we're not utilizing any jail as treatment centers, we just think that we're not as skilled at handling people as the professionals that do it, and for their mental health and physical well-being, we think that would be a better alternative. Be comfortable to have medical staff available to them right in the jail, which they don't have with us. So that's, I don't know, nothing about treatment because they're only with us short term anyway, till the court opens up. So, so that was one question. Your other question was, let's see, yeah, we got so many questions there.
Yeah, that's why, listen, super. You better keep up with me here, okay? So here's the other, let me go back to my questions. Okay, so the last hearing, you remember? Okay, so I'm just curious about back in July, we learned.
The 9 officers, right.
Yeah, so I'm just
that
curious.
One there is, unfortunately, as you know, because you read in the paper, it's in federal investigation. So we really can't comment on that one right now. So
no, I'm not curious. I'm more curious about what you've learned as a result of that, and what systems have you put in place to prevent overtime fraud in the future?
Yeah, that might kind of lead to some information that's being investigated. So I apologize for that one.
That's fair. No, that's fair. So what about perhaps Lisa, the 3,891 hours of overtime that were never worked? Do you have a figure amount in terms of what that cost?
Yeah, using an average hourly overtime rate, it equates to approximately $257,000. I think you froze.
Yeah, I froze. And I hope it wasn't an ugly freeze because I have the worst internet here. So I don't know what you guys ended up seeing on your screen. But, so I do. So, okay. So I think I heard you say 200,000.
Approximately 257,000 if we use the average hourly overtime rate that we use a lot when we're doing projections.
That's a lot of money. Are we getting, is that money coming, is that, okay, I'm not even gonna go there. Okay, in the PowerPoint presentation, there was an increased communication about overtime, a commitment to overtime reduction.
was
I'm just
internal,
curious about.
Alpha. That was for internal, but I mean,
Okay.
so that we can, really monitor it and sort. But again, we're already doing that, and we're doing a good job of it. It's just this COVID kind of minimizes our ability to meet the way we did. But they are continue to do that on a weekly basis at the deployment, and they review it with each of the commanding officers. So.
Yeah. And I have the gavel up, and I have one last question. I promise you all. I'm just curious, given the fact that there's all of these discrepancies, has there ever been an appetite to have an outside vendor help support some of this work so that we're talking about building trust and transparency in city government? Is there an opportunity to hire an outside agency to help monitor some of this overtime situation? Just curious if that's ever been considered.
It hasn't been, it might cost too much, but no, it hasn't been considered. I think, again, they do a pretty good job. If we could get people out injured under control, I think that would be the key. That's the key to this whole issue.
Yeah, and I'm just, the $200,000 that's on the table, is that money, is that something is that being reconciled somehow?
Collectively bargained. That's collectively bargained, Counselor. That's within the 4 hours when you work hours not worked. That means they came in, they were ordered to come in, they worked an hour and a half, but they got paid for 4. So it'd be 2.5 hours that they got paid for that they weren't here. So like say there was a crime, a significant crime, and you called in the investigators, they came in, worked 2.5 hours, did the investigation for that crime, and then they get an extra hour and a half pay.
Was that the chime? Madam Chair, was that the chime? Did my time expire?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
Okay, I'm gonna get y'all later. Turn around. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Asabi George, and then it'll be Councilor, I believe, Janey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You're giving me the gavel already. I do want to just go on record saying that I think that the 4 hours is a reasonable allotment when we think about overtime for some of these responses. It's just that we need to be creative and thoughtful about how we're managing that process and eliminating some of the other waste and making sure and ensuring that when we utilize overtime, that we utilize it sparingly and productively and efficiently and really in the end responsibly. Councilor Mejia brought up some of the questions and conversations around central booking, which has been a work in progress for a long time. And I know it's been something that Sheriff Tompkins has been, I think, a proponent of. If I'm correct, that conversation hasn't existed sort of in the public space for a little bit. Have we analyzed or taken a look at what the savings of having a central booking would mean for us as a city? And I think the potential revenue it could create for Suffolk County.
Counselor, there's a slide. Did you happen to get the copy of the presentation?
I'm sure that it's in my inbox somewhere.
Yeah, we could send it to. We'll make sure we send you that.
I'm sure that if you got it, it's just in my inbox.
Yeah,
it was very recently sent over.
Oh, okay. Okay.
As far as I couldn't agree with you more. So an officer gets a call. He's home in bed sleeping at 1:30 in the morning. And he gets a call to respond to a crime. So he has to get out of bed, respond, take care of business. And so he's back, it takes him 2.5 hours. And
I don't want to pay a police officer to get dressed or to get out of bed. I think that just talking about the 4 hours is fine. Yeah. I don't know any profession that pays to get out of bed and get dressed. And I say that as someone who's supporting the 4 hour piece.
I agree with you. I'm just saying I agree with you.
Yeah, being more responsible in how we're assigning them and how we're managing the system. And I think to Councilor Arroyo's question, maybe it was Councilor, I'm not sure whose question it was, but I do think that there's, the electronic process may help us. If it doesn't help us very directly realize some savings, it will, I think at the very least, help us understand where the deficiencies lie and where some of the work remains undone. So I think to Council President Janey's point earlier, that's an effort that I too would like to see underway. And, I understand the priorities of Do It and others, but if we could start that ball rolling to look at that electronic process a little bit sooner and with a little bit more urgency, I think, especially as we think ahead to Chair Bach's efforts to do these hearings quarterly, that at this next quarterly mark that we have some sort of update or next steps on that piece. You spoke a lot, Super, to some of the challenges around police officers that are out injured and our need to get them back into work or get them retired. As you know, I've been advocating for a number of police officers who were shot in the line of duty who will not come back, and we're trying to do right by them. But there's this other class of police officers who have also been shot in the line of duty, are out injured technically, costing the district and the city a lot of money because the process to retire them is so cumbersome and takes so long. And that's not your system to fix. That's the city system, really the state system, to fix that system so that we can retire out police officers appropriately and then right size the department and hire additional police officers as needed, and making sure that sort of all these other things, the strategic planning, the proper formulas around manning minimums. And I don't know if I appreciate the term manning minimums, because we want to make sure that our communities are well covered, that we're not planning to the minimum, that we're appropriately staffing police departments across the city, across all shifts, and able to respond to the needs. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit to the savings around the central booking piece, and then the impacts of, maybe a little bit deeper on the impacts of police officers that are still on the books, out injured, that we'd like to potentially retire out and hire additional police officers and have an appropriately sized police force. And again, I apologize for throwing so much on sort of the table at the same time.
So it does impact the overtime because while they're waiting to be retired, there's only so many spots. Like we'll just use the number 2,000. There's only 2,000. It's actually 2,250, right? So we can't add another officer until one is left. So that they're basically holding the spot of someone that may be able to come in and assist in all the efforts, all the policing efforts. So that's how that is affecting the overtime and our ability to respond to the community.
And the cost savings around central booking, I know it's in the presentation, but just for the
about $3.5 million, Counselor. Again, that's when I mentioned not only financial savings or costs, it's also human costs of caring for the prisoners while they're in our custody. It's also daunting on the officers too, because you have to make sure you have to check them they're not the professionals that Sheriff Tompkins people are. So we do a great job at it, but there's people, and then we don't have the medical services on site. There's a lot of things that would be beneficial for that initiative.
Yeah, no, and I think that there's some general support across the board for the central booking idea. And then the last thing I would leave you with, and perhaps this is something that we could talk about in greater detail at the next sort of issue of this. But that I think that if we were leveraging our role as Boston is the nation's first and Boston's finest, to really coordinate services with the courts. I think the courts are a really missing component in the overtime piece, and I don't know how we get them to the table. Perhaps colleagues and I can discuss that, but I think that coordinating services, again, in a more responsible way, at courthouses across our city and across the county are a really important piece around just building in some efficiencies that will lead to cost savings. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's it for me.
We agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. I think that I think Council President Janey had to step away for a moment. So I think that we're back up to the top. And I'm mindful, I do want to sort of try to make this the last round of questions. I'm mindful that we've had our guests here for a long time. So just a few quick clarification questions from me, Superintendent. One is just vis-a-vis this whole court conversation we've been having. When I looked at the data, it was like, in terms of those, how much of the court hours are not worked because of our contractual obligation to pay in those 4-hour blocks. It's normally been floating in the 40%, but this past quarter, it's like 68% of the court time is for hours not worked, which makes me think that like whatever it is that that officers are still doing at the court in COVID is one of the activities that people are in and out really quickly. And then there's like a bunch of extra time. And so do you have any idea of what are the things that people are doing court appearances for right now in COVID?
I do not know.
Okay. Well, I don't know. And Lisa or
To the defendants, as the case that Council Flaherty brought up, I don't know if it's, but the officer obviously showing up as summoned, and I don't know how their dispositions are, what's occurring
right.
there.
No, I'm just interested in the question of what, there's obviously a shift in what our courts are even doing right now, right? In terms of in-person and everything. And whatever it is, it's definitely one of the types of, or some of the types of activities that cause shorter court appearances for our officers. And I was just curious if anyone knew what that was.
Yeah, that could be related with the judges too. I mean, I don't know. To answer your question, I don't. I'm just total speculation. There's too many factors and variables that could go into that.
Right. Deputy Superintendent Chin, you don't have any idea, do you, what people are going through?
I can only speculate that maybe it's COVID related because the judges don't want so many people up in the courthouses at one time. So they're releasing the officers maybe early if they're continuing the case or whatever they need to do is they're trying to expedite that so that there aren't a lot of people there maybe, because of COVID,
Yeah, so it would just be interesting to know whether it's that. It could also, there's also a world in which it's a lot of evidence drop off and then people are doing a bunch more things online subsequently, and so I'm curious because I do think that in terms of savings.
If he wasn't injured, if Superintendent Eddings was here, he'd be able to answer that better, but he's out injured. He got hit by a car. So he's out injured for a little bit.
Yeah, and we're all wishing him a speedy recovery. That was a terrible incident. I just think that, I think Councilor Arroyo raised this, but it seems like if we were going to try to structurally save court overtime costs for the long term, obviously one thing would be to look at the 4-hour minimum in the contract conversation. But the other thing is that if there are types of activities, like for instance, dropping off evidence that are routinely, somebody's in court for 15 minutes and then we're paying them 4 hours, those seem like the type of things that we would want to structurally reduce through electronic drop off, bundling, those kinds of things.
Great. We've tried everything over the years. Council, I think one thing we had, I'm going to be honest here, is the 4-hour minimum. I think that's, it's very difficult to, that's a difficult conversation because some of the people, their lives are significantly affected by attending court. So,
yeah.
Councilor Bog, I just wanted to add, when these officers are summoned to court, it's not optional. They have to attend because they're being summoned by the court, the district attorney's office, and they have to be prepared to testify. So a lot of this, you have to understand that the officers show up for court, they're ready to testify, they're ready to go to trial, but there are outside factors, like the defense attorney might ask for a continuance because he's not prepared to go to trial yet. Or there are a lot of outside conditions that affect whether an officer stays in court for the day or gets released, or maybe the defendant was sick, or maybe the defense attorney was sick, or there are a lot of other factors I just wanted to, clarify that, that it isn't really up to us sometimes, but we do have to show up for court once we're summoned. So, sometimes that's out of our control. I mean, we don't know what date they picked,
Yeah, and I'll just say, go ahead.
Like Bobby said, if we could really strengthen our relationships with the courts and the other involved parties, that would, everybody, the defense attorneys, the DAs, the court, so it's all this, we're not the overriding factor here, believe me. Because we have tried everything.
Yeah, no, and I just think that maybe there's a thin end of the wedge here with evidence drop off. I know that jurisdictions vary in terms of how much of that is done digitally these days and how much that's like physically delivered. And I think it perhaps, as Councilor Flaherty raised, we need to be, whether it's asking officers to fill out some quick online form so that we track, what's the occasion of summons, like what type of summons is it and what's happening. I just think we need to get some handle on this because the public definitely sees it. And it's just like
the last time Councilor Block, and I said, oh, we don't do that. Well, I found out I was wrong. We do. Actually, some officers do drop some, for whatever reason, there are legitimate reasons, but because it seems to me like common sense, but I guess, there are some instances where it's needed to happen.
right. And I hope, Superintendent, that you understand that what the council is really asking for on a bunch of these fronts is a kind of transparency. Like it's the data to understand, like things like the breakdown of why are people going to court and what's happening and what's going on, right? Or like with, with the minimum staffing levels across the board. It's like, okay, so we pay replacement costs to hit these targets. What are these targets? What is the justification behind them? Like, it's just like, that's the appetite here, is to get more of that detail. And I think that, even when you and Councilor Campbell were talking about, how the police have become the one-stop shop and I think like there's broad agreement across the council and with the department that that doesn't make sense. I think that we need to be having a joined up conversation that sort of says, well, what is the analysis of the 911 calls that could be answered by someone other than police? And then to your point about, right, that's a cahoots-like program. There's already something filed in the council considering that. But of course, to do that, we would need to start putting numbers on, how would it affect our minimum staffing levels and how would it affect our overtime if we could move this amount of work of this type into another thing? And we need to be able to put numbers on that because frankly, to stand up new things that are first line response, we need the money, right?
Agree with you. So it's like, so people are so conditioned for the 911 response. So it's going to take time to wean people off of that. But we need, so with, like I said, we had working with the office of mayor, OMB and the mayor's office, support of the mayor, he's, mandating these other agencies step up. So the first one was the DTD. So now we're going to move down the line and have these conversations and start siphoning these tasks back to the people that should be doing it. And then once that occurs, there's going to be some time frame that's going to be needed where the people actually have confidence in these new systems because they're still going to be so 3 a.m. they call 911 and they're going to expect the police. And we have to make sure when they call 911 that someone's going to show up and take care of their issue. So,
and I think actually that this council and that the public has patience for a structural transition. I think what you hear the impatience for is a plan to get there. Like, I think that if we said, oh, this is, we think that we could shift this much kind of overtime permanently if we actually stood up an agency to do these kinds or asked an existing agency to cover these kinds of calls. And then there's going to be some interim period where there's overlap. And so, if you were coming to us and saying, council, we don't think we can hit this target this year, but we think this is our path to hitting it next year, right? Like, I think folks would be receptive to that. But I think the challenge,
when we can hit that, but we are definitely, because it takes time. Like, people are so, again, used to do it abruptly would be so disruptive. People would be, your phone would be ringing off the hook.
Yeah, which it does already, but yeah, I think the point is though that to get there, to get anything significant, we've got to plan ahead, and we need the data, and it's just, I think it's just important for folks watching at home to understand that when we're talking about a $72.5 million overtime budget, right, which was that was the overtime spent last year, right? The budget was 60 million. Our budget for this year is 48 million. Sometimes it's hard with these things to have a sense of scale. And I know for the department, it feels like we're really harping and focusing on this, but it's because it's so much more money, just that overtime budget, than most of our civilian departments entirely, right? And so for us, it's just like, it's a really big chunk of money in terms of our ability to do any alternative things. So it's just, that's, certainly where I'm coming from on this. I said I wanted to be mindful of time, so just confirming it's 8.5% of the overtime so far that was sort of ordered versus not ordered. About that, is that right, Lisa? You're muted.
I'm just gonna confirm that right now.
Okay. Yeah, if you can just check that, and then also if anybody has an answer for. There was a year-on-year comparison that said that our gang car OT utilization was down 25% versus last year. And I was just wondering if there's any explanation as to why. Was that an intentional decision? Does that have to do with calls? What's going on with that?
It's cutting the budget, Counselor. That we have to, and those are the times that we respond to rising crime patterns or community concerns or complaints. But, it's a luxury we can't afford.
Right. So you guys did an intentional cut of that. And I guess that's part of, again, one thing that we would love on the council end, and we can pursue this for the next time we do this again. But, is to understand, like, I think the cuts that you have achieved as a department, I mean, as I mentioned before, some of them have to do with sort of the contingencies of this COVID period, but some of them have been about revising your targets for different things and revising your kind of sub budgets for different things. And I think that's part of what the council would like to understand, is sort of what that overall strategic plan is. Because I would echo Councillor Campbell that I think we haven't fully really heard. We certainly haven't heard a plan today to get up.
We looked at everything and we're cutting where we can.
Right. It's just, yeah. No, and I think it's just the difference, Superintendent, between sort of that impressionistic activity and then how to share it out in a way that that we can scrutinize from an oversight perspective, that the public can scrutinize. I think that's part of what you're hearing from us. I want to see other counselors who have a third round of questions. I know not everyone does. I know Councillor Arroyo does. I think Councillor Arroyo, you are next.
Thank you so much. And I just want to tell folks who are watching, my questions have been mostly centered on court OT because we have 2 hearings happening right now. There's a general overtime analysis and review to make sure that they're on scale to hit the cuts that were proposed in this budget on overtime. And there's also another one that's happening that I wrote that has to deal with court overtime. Specifically in oversight, specifically around court overtime. And that's why my questions have been that way. And so in that regard, what really led to that was a Bay State Banner article called in 2 Places at Once. That essentially found, through running the court overtime data that I was provided, which came with the times when people were in court, in other words, the hours in which they clocked into a courthouse and the hour in which they clocked out, and ran that against a database that Woke Windows had, which was essentially a database of police officer reports, but that only listed the officer who wrote or authored that report. And it found 133 hits, give or take, of officers who had listed a time they were in a courthouse, right in the smack in the middle of it, or at the end of it, or at the beginning of it, but were also writing police reports for arrests or traffic citations or FIOs. And within that number, that's a number that removed, just so we're clear, the ones where they were writing FIOs in the courthouse in which they were present, which would make perfect sense, or an arrest of some nature that happened in the courthouse or in front of the courthouse or in the vicinity of a courthouse. And so those are 130 something instances where officers were saying they were in court. Some court supervisor had signed off that they were in court and that they left court at this other time, but they were on some other scene somewhere writing this police report. I believe, in my understanding, is that that is currently under investigation, that you're looking into why those discrepancies exist. Is that accurate? You're on mute.
Oh, okay. I don't know who put me on. Someone must have put me on mute.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. There's
so-
currently an investigation, that stemmed from that banner article. So.
And so I have some questions on the framework of that. There's two ways to go about the investigation. I know you can't talk about the investigation, but I'm just going to say this and you can hear it and you have to answer.
I'll hear it.
I hear you. You've got a private investigation going on. There's two different ways to go about that investigation. That report came from very limited information. BPD has access to every Boston police report they write, and they have access to every FIO they write, and they have access to every traffic citation they write. It's in your database. You also have access to the data that you've given me, which is the data about who was in what courthouse at what time, allegedly. You can do an investigation based on the 133 names that were found using a limited database. In other words, the database that Wolf Windows has that only includes the authors who authored these reports and may not include reports that do not exist in their database. It does not include officers who may have reported to these scenes who would be in these police reports, but did not author said police reports. In other words, you can maintain an investigation on just these 133 people, which would not, in my opinion, be a thorough investigation, or you can audit your entire system to see how many of these irregularities and discrepancies are happening. And if you're able to speak to that, are you doing a limited investigation just into the 133 names or so that are on that report, or are you doing a system-wide audit to see how widespread that problem is?
Yeah, sorry to say, Counselor, that it's under investigation, and I'm not hiding behind that. It's just the truth. Because I couldn't give you a qualified answer anyway, because
when you make findings in that investigation, will that then be public, whether or not that investigation is limited to 133 or whether or not you did a system-wide audit?
Will it be made public? I think so, especially with that new system that they're putting in place. I think everything's going to be public.
Okay, so then we'll touch base around then. My final thing here.
I think so. I'm not 100% sure.
All I said was we'll touch base then.
All right.
And so in terms of the other aspect of this, which is overall, and I just want to speak sort of to the other hearing that's happening at the simultaneously. I can only speak for myself. I have not heard yet how staffing at these departments in precincts is calculated. I haven't heard yet how we make these decisions. And I want to just say two things. The fact that arrests are down 37%, I think you said, is great. The fact that crime is down, that's both of those things are phenomenal. But they also, to me, would indicate perhaps that our staffing levels are not necessarily indicative of whether or not crime is up or down. And so if we're got a calculation or a system that we have not yet been made aware of, and I know that Councillor Campbell said that some folks voted for this budget because they believed that we would hit these OT markers. I voted against this budget because I didn't think we would. And the reason I didn't think we would is I was never presented a plan of how we calculate staffing at these precincts. I don't know what that is yet. I don't know if anybody here has, other than perhaps you on the administration side. And I've never been presented a plan on how we cut OT. And with all due respect, just we cut it here, we cut it there, but there's no system to that. Why, the gang cars or whatever it is that's being cut. I think we would all benefit from understanding plainly and clearly how we do staffing and how we come up with what the minimum staffing levels have to be, and like what the calculus is there and what the formula is there. If there is a formula, it shouldn't be gut feel. It should be a formula.
Councilor, it's very informal discussion that the Bureau of Field Services has with the district commanders. and
Yeah,
they
and
take
I think it should
all
be
those,
is
I
basically what
mean,
I'm
the only
The-
way is, due to be present at that conversation. It's only, I mean, I had never taken part of that conversation either, so.
What
but
I'm
they-
saying is that's a problem. That's not how we staff anything else. That's not how I staff my office hours. That's not how we staff
No.
city. That's not how we
So-
staff these things in some
So
room.
another,
And so I'm just saying, and I know that nobody here is in charge of that. But what I'm saying is, in terms of the numbers coming forward, we certainly need that plan. I can't emphasize this enough. Otherwise, it's just us sitting here for 2 hours trying to make sense of these numbers without what we're even trying to calculate it by. And
I
it's
don't-
similar for OT, right? Just because we've been used to giving out these levels of OT and replacement hours and all these different things doesn't mean that we necessarily have to keep doing that, especially when crime and arrests are down. And I understand that violent crime in terms of shootings is up, but there's levels to all of that, and there should be some kind of system that we can look at that doesn't involve it's in a room somewhere that you have to be in to know what's happening, and none of us are in that room. I mean, we are the fiscal stewards. I vote on a budget just like all of my colleagues, and on that budget, the reason why I voted no, to be perfectly clear, is we never had this plan, and so there was no way for me to actually say that these cuts were ever going to be substantial or real. And I don't think we're going to make them real, frankly, if we keep going this way. So that's it. I see the gavel. I do see that Deputy Superintendent Chin unmuted, so I'm not sure if he wants to add something there.
No, I think Superintendent Hassan covered it when he was answering your question. Like, I understand what your question is. There is a formula. I'm not in charge of that, so I can't tell you what that formula is. But like I said, there's a lot of variables. There's the call volume of a certain area, crime, things like that, and minimum manning.
Response time, Jimmy.
So I just love to see what that formula is, and whoever is responsible for that, maybe we can book them for the next one of these overtime hearings, or her, whoever it is. And so thank you again for taking the time today for this hearing. I know in 3 hours. So thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. It's like budget season again.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. I think I see next up, who's still here, would be Councilor Flynn. Councilor Flynn, any further questions or comments?
No, Council Block. No further questions, no further comments. I missed some of the meetings, so I'm going to listen to some of this on video later. So thank you, Council Block.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Superintendent.
And Councilor Mejia?
Yes. So first, I just want to say thank you to Superintendent and to Lisa O'Brien as well. I didn't catch your title, but I'm sorry.
Deputy Director of
Deputy Director. That's right. Even then, Superintendent, you don't let Lisa answer for herself. We're gonna have to work on that, okay?
Now I just want to build her up. Now she can.
Yeah. The next time, we'll put you on a timeout. Okay. So I just want to say thank you to you both and Deputy Superintendent Ching too for participating with us today. I know it's not easy to be in these spaces when we're like asking you all 101 questions, but I just really do appreciate you all leaning into the conversation, because I know a lot of people who are following us in different spaces are new to a lot of this information, right? They don't know how city government works. They don't know how decisions get made. So, we really do appreciate you all leaning into the conversation. But I have one question, and maybe it's not here, but I'm curious. I know I've heard some of my colleagues talk about utilizing civilians and other, there's so many people who are unemployed right now in the city of Boston. What opportunities and what prevents us from hiring regular people, I guess, I don't know what word to call folks, to do details as opposed to having police officers? And what opportunities exist to potentially utilize folks who have entry level, who can help support some of the writing and the court appearances? Like, I'm just trying to think of what are some of the cost-effective ways that we can employ other folks who are not police officers to assume some of these roles that may help us reduce the budget? Something to think about. And what prevents us from doing that? I'm curious. And then I'll answer those questions and then I'll wrap.
Yeah, well, I think some of this, that has many variables and multiple possibilities on the answers. So for the flag men or women, you know, again, that's contractual with the city and the state and with the unions. And we find it, you know, a lot of those details that go uncovered, you know, like so they'll have some covered, like the more important ones are covered that provide the public safety. So, you know, I can't even speak to which ones are uncovered because I know like sometimes Fenway doesn't get covered, but so then we have to cover it on tour, you know, with the officers that are working, we backfill and charge the Fenway overtime. But anyway, yeah, so to answer your question, there's too many possibilities and variabilities to answer that question. We could spend, that's been a whole controversial issue for many, many years that I would like to avoid getting into.
And do you think that we might be able to, don't show that gravel, Bach, I still got a few more minutes, okay? Do you think that we might be able to, in this moment in time, figure out how we can address this issue in a way that is fair to everyone? I mean, I know that no, there's no hope.
Well, I don't know. Again, that thing has been debated by many levels of government and people, you know, for years. And I want to stay out of that conversation.
Okay, there's a reason why.
Sorry.
No, listen, there's always a reason why, and I always got to figure it out as I go. But I do believe that no matter how uncomfortable the conversation is, it is something that we're going to have to figure out having, because there's some folks who still feel that we could do things differently. And just because that's how things have been done in the past doesn't necessarily mean that's how we should continue doing it.
But,
Because
you know, the officers that are doing those details, they provide, it's basically free police coverage for the city because they're responsible for those areas that they're working, because their primary responsibility is to the city. And there've been multiple, you know, significant intervention, police interventions where that officers saved lives, apprehended dangerous suspects. So, you know, it's, you know, they do a great job doing their job. So.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I will say won't be a question. So Chairwoman Bach, I'm sure you're happy to hear that. But it's just more of my ending comments is that, you know, I think as we continue to move forward in this conversation, I think that the more information that we can share publicly, whether it be through a dashboard, people just like to see things, they like to see movement, and they like to see as though there is some level of like, we're getting somewhere with this discussion, right? So I think that it would be helpful if we could have, I love the idea of doing these things quarterly, but if we can hold ourselves accountable to a few action items that we're going to do this between now and the next 3 months, and then call people into the process to see how we can support those action items. But I just think that we can't keep going around in circles and having the same conversation and expecting different results unless we really start building the infrastructure for what accountability is going to look like, Councilor Bach. So I would recommend that if we do decide to do this every quarter, that we should walk out of these conversations with 3 very specific to-dos that we can then hold ourselves accountable to. And then, you know, what does the council need to do to help support those efforts? I think because it's going to take all of us to move the work forward. And so I would recommend that we figure out what that looks like. And thank you all again for participating in this very long hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Yeah, I wanna close us out, and then I will go to public testimony. I wanna echo colleagues in thanking BPD for being here for so long and answering so many questions and sending us the data. I think that as a number of colleagues have said, I think that the council feels strongly that we need a clearer plan that's more structural for how to really achieve the savings that are built into the budget. I'll quarrel with Councilor Arroyo only to say that I think one of the issues that came up when we were voting on this budget, he mentioned not believing that we had a plan to get this done. My concern was there were also folks who were proposing that we cut the overtime still deeper. And I never, I was concerned that we didn't have a plan to do that. So I think that perspective that he and I share maybe led us to two different conclusions on that. But I think there's no question that to reduce the amount of overtime that we're talking about here, we need structural changes about the way that we think about police staffing, the way that we approach civilianization, getting back to those sort of 97 civilian jobs that the department was talking about in the summer. Not currently civilian, but could be. And I think also we haven't talked about some of the invisible ways in which the prospects of overtime and the prospects of details sometimes encourage people to plan their schedules. And I think I really want to echo what Councilor Mejia said about details and say that when we've got 26,000 hours of details that are going unfilled, it seems to me like there's definitely an opportunity to put our residents of Boston to work. And I think to your point, Superintendent, about the sort of long running issues, I think at a minimum that police officers should not have a quarrel with work that's currently going undone being done by our Boston residents. And then I think there's a broader conversation about where we need officers doing those details and where civilians would suffice. And I think I want to flag that as an issue and also recognize the superintendent's point that it's an issue related to the contract. And so that's a conversation that we'll be having in a different hearing, but one that's running very parallel to this. I do want to raise significant issues about the number of sick and injured officers, and I appreciate Superintendent and Lisa and Deputy Superintendent sort of the references to the fact that the department itself is also really concerned with that and trying to figure it out. It's a really alarming rise, and knowing that it's long-term, and in addition to obviously the hundreds of our officers who have been impacted by COVID over the course of this, who I think we all want to lift up, and for those who are currently out with COVID, wish them a speedy recovery and return. But the fact that we've got, in addition to that, this really structural sick and injury problem over the last year and a half, 2 years, is something that I still don't feel like I understand. And I think I just want to, when it comes to the data, I just wanted to flag, Superintendent, that I think it would be great if you guys have updated those numbers through mid-October, if you could send that to us, just so we can see what the basis on the 17.9% is. And we'll obviously be following up with, there are further data questions that we got from the public that we haven't had answered. There are, and at our next hearing, we'll be sort of seeing where we are halfway through the year. I do think, though, to Councilor Mejia's point and Councilor Campbell's point, that the question of how to make this data more transparent to the public overall and consistently, so that it's not a question of every time the council sending a request, and also so that for you all, it's sort of a more standard set of forms that you're sharing with people, I think is something that we need to work in partnership on. So that's a sort of set of comments from me. I think the final thing that I just want to stress about the reason that I think we need the structured plan, and we need to get a little less, I forget the word that you used, Superintendent, but just sort of informal about this question of minimum staffing levels, is that, at the city level, we as counselors are responsible for the whole budget, all of the money in the budget. And there are like real direct trade-offs. So right now, that $50 million that Boston, we're currently we're not coming in under budget in terms of revenue by about $50 million for the year so far. That's meaning that we aren't hiring in other departments. Like, there are real jobs and real functions of the city that are going unfilled because of the needs on that, like the revenue shortfall on that side. And obviously we are hiring in terms of the cadets on the police side. And part of that is related to this assessment of minimum staffing levels, the assessment of replacement needs, et cetera. So I just think it's really important to stress that the city money from the general fund is fungible, and that it's money that we're looking at to simultaneously address needs across all our departments. And so we really have to, as having that fiduciary responsibility that Councilor O'Malley and Councilor Flaherty referenced at the beginning, means that we have to understand the trade-offs that we are making. And I think that that's what you're hearing frustration from us on, is just not being able to fully understand understand and frankly make judgments about those trade-offs. And so we're going to continue to push for more transparency there. But I am grateful to the department for the data that you provided to us today, and for the extensive time, and to all my colleagues for being here and participating in the hearing. With that, I want to let the department go and say thanks again. And then I do want to turn to, we have at least 3 folks in public testimony who have been waiting a very long time, and I want to turn to them next. So the first of those is going to be David Weimer. And then if Dominique and Genevieve can just raise your hands to confirm that you want to testify, that would be great. I see Genevieve, so it'll be David and then Genevieve. David?
Yeah, thank you. So my name's David Weimer. I'm part of the Building Up People in Our Prisons Coalition. And I'm here to support and reiterate many of the questions that counselors have posed today, and ask the council to use the robust statutory power it has to hold the BPD accountable for its spending. Policing does not keep the city safe. Policing causes harm, and it causes harm disproportionately on Black and unsheltered people in Boston. And as Councilor Buck was just saying, every dollar spent on BPD overtime and every dollar that the BPD spends over its allocation year after year is a dollar effectively taken away from money we could spend on jobs, on housing, other services that address the root causes of violence and harm. And Councilor Campbell asked earlier what is stopping the city from capping overtime costs. And actually the council and the city must use its powers under Section 42 of the city charter to hold the BPD and its administration accountable for its spending. The city and the council, through the general counsel, seem to interpret this section to give the BPD effectively a blank check for spending. And I just want to read the section so we're all on the same page. It says, no official of said city, except in case of extreme emergency involving the health or safety of the people or their property, shall expend intentionally in any fiscal year any sum in excess of the appropriations duly made in accordance with law, nor involve the city in any contract for the future payment of money in excess of such appropriation, except as provided in Section 17G of this Act. There's no other reason, hook that the city has that allows the BPD to continue to spend over its appropriation. Now, as I understand it, this body chooses to interpret extreme emergency as whatever the BPD says it is. So is replacement overtime to meet opaque minimum staffing levels extreme emergency? Is the normal operating budget for overtime, does that count as extreme emergency? In my view, this interpretation abdicates responsibility for holding a department accountable that, through its lack of transparency, I put in a public record request about these minimum staffing levels and was told the department has no records about it. There's been credible accusations about overtime fraud and consistent overspending. Through all those things, the department has shown itself unwilling to be accountable to the people of Boston. And only by exercising your legal authority through Section 42 can we begin to make a safer and healthier city by reinvesting the vast money we have been funneling toward policing into union jobs, housing, cultural programs, and community-led violence interventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Next up is Genevieve, and then Mallory Honora, and then I would just ask Dominique if you want to testify to raise your blue hand. And then otherwise, if there's any other public testimony, you should shoot an email right now to Shane Pack, SHANE.PAC at boston.gov. All right, Genevieve.
Thank you. Thank you, city councilors. I'm having a little bit of internet issues, so if you can't hear me or if I stop for any reason, please let me know.
We can hear you.
I just want to start by saying it's actually been really difficult to both listen and digest this hearing. I'm speaking directly to the police department here. The amount of times you all have dodged a question during this hearing and talked about the greater need for policing and how hard police officers work is not what an overtime hearing is set up for. This is a city council hearing, meaning the public wants to hear the police department address the department as a whole and equip yourselves to answer very basic questions, such as minimum staffing levels that we've been trying to get and understand for months now, and core overtime procedures. I'm also here to evaluate what systems are in place that favors a police department that consistently gets away with being opaque, gets an unchecked amount of budgetary allotment and overtime, and continues to assert itself as the pinnacle of public safety, and constantly utilize that justification for bloated spending. It's outrageous to sort of hear higher ups in BPD come into this hearing and not have answers for most questions or deflect by saying the same things over and over again. I also don't know about any other department that gets to come in and present errors and inconsistencies with the numbers and presentation that you all came in with. So I'm a little bit upset, but I'm grateful to be here. While we've been offered a lot of back padding by the police for reductions in overtime, and Kenzie had mentioned this in this hearing as well, a lot of that has been contingent on reductions because of COVID. So it's pretty clear that there is not a strategic plan in place by the BPD to keep up with these reductions in overtime in the long term. Community organizers who are most impacted and are in relationship with those most impacted have solutions and have detailed proposals for how to get overtime accountability. Groups like Families for Justice's Healing are demanding a cap on overtime budget and a cap on how much overtime individual officers can make that is tethered to a demand that the size of the police force needs to be reduced. It's striking to me that the obsession with making sure that the public is safe is to make sure that the police department is well budgeted and staffed, when historically the city of Boston has consistently resourced the police department while largely ignoring other public sector needs, including that of teachers and of accessible and affordable housing, and the list goes on and on. I reject the false assumption offered by BPD and some of the counselors that by large the people of Boston have come to expect the police, when actually the disenfranchised people of Boston need resources like treatment centers and access to fair incomes, healthcare, and housing. I'm also aghast to hear about the excitement in rolling forward with a regional lockup and situating a treatment center within a jail. Jails are not service providers, nor is it appropriate to infer that. This kind of irresponsible overexertion of power and responsibility by the prison and policing systems is actually antithetical to what Hassan has exclaimed, which is that police don't need to be in all aspects of society. People who are suffering in jails need care. They need to not be in jail. They need to be in consensual, appropriate treatment centers. I'll just end by saying there's a long list of questions that Councillor Campbell mentioned coming from community organizations that I really look forward to getting every single answer to, since many of those questions were not covered by city councilors today who did receive these questions in advance. We will continue to ask questions and demand greater transparency, not only from BPD, but also from city councilors. Lastly, for those watching, the police contract is currently being bargained. So there is opportunity here. And the first step is to bring some transparency around the contract negotiations so the public can actually understand what is being talked about, what is on the table during these discussions. And the second is for the contract negotiations to be a place that we can really shift the role of police in Boston. So I'm asking people engaged in this to stay tuned and follow groups like Families for Justice Healing, Defund Boss Cops, Muslim Justice League, Asian American Resource Workshop, Youth Justice Power Union, and others for more updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. Mallory? Mallory, you're muted.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Mallory Honora, and I'm the Executive Director of Families for Justice as Healing. We are planning to submit written testimony, and our members have been watching all day. We're also leading organizing to shift construction detail jobs out of the Boston Police Department, so I do greatly appreciate counselors' questions related to that. We can put people who have been most impacted by policing and prisons to work at high-paying public sector jobs with healthcare, and we should. I thought it was really important for me to talk and go on the record to just absolutely reject the Suffolk County regional lockup as a solution to overtime. Families for Justice as Healing has been leading organizing against this at the state level. There was a bill proposed just this year that was put into study, and the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department was advocating for it and also asking for more money for it. So I just cannot stress enough that a regional lockup or central booking, whatever word that you want to use, is just a euphemism for a jail, and specifically the South Bay Jail. The solution to mental and physical health issues, and in particular issues related to drug use while a person is in custody, is not another form of detention. It is no longer arresting people for drugs and mental illness. Jail is not treatment, and correction officers, guards, are not medical providers. It's not cost savings. It's moving millions from one pot of money to another pot of money that is ultimately being stripped from communities, and in particular communities of color. The city already pays $4 million to the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department, and the state pays over $115 million to the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department, and they will invariably ask for more money to run the regional lockup. Also, as a person who has been bailed out from a police station, has bailed other people out from police stations, and bailed people out from almost every jail and prison in the Commonwealth, it will be much harder to release people from a regional lockup, AKA South Bay, than it will be from police stations. The bail commissioner comes to South Bay one time. You have to be there by 4 o'clock to be there to post bail. It is an extremely limited and confined process with very little public information about how to do it. And people will just not be able to be free from that building. We're also concerned about any potential of building a brand new jail as a central booking or lockup place. We simply cannot morally or financially afford any new jail or prison construction. So really, I already know the council is exploring ways to limit the roles and responsibility of police officers. And for us at Families for Justice as Healing, we want to see an end to drug arrests, period. And we want to see police away from any crisis that communities are experiencing and non-armed responses to those incidents. So what we need in order to do that, of course, is significant investment in community and neighborhood level people-led responses to harm and trauma. And that, of course, includes healing and drug treatment. So just wanted to go on the record and just oppose in the strongest terms any other forms of detention. And certainly I am not in any way saying that jail lockups are safe for people. They're absolutely not. But people need to be taken to consensually, when they want to, need to be taken to the hospital and to treatment centers, and hopefully to better funded community programs and not to any form of jail or detention. So really looking forward in future hearings, and again in written testimony, we think we can create well over 200 high-paying jobs, and that's just for the detail hours that are worked. So we're learning today that more than half of the detail hours are actually rejected by the Boston Police Department. And so many Boston residents are struggling more than ever with unemployment. And so many have been historically struggling with unemployment, right? Particularly people with quarries. And this could be an incredible opportunity to pay people living wages with good benefits, high-paying public sector jobs, and moving that administration out of the BPD into City Hall, right? To be run. So what we plan on telling you way more about our neighbor support for that and all the organizing that we're doing and concrete plans to make that happen, and really hoping the city council expresses to the mayor's office that is a mandate in these contract negotiations. So thank you very much for listening, and look forward to communicating more via written testimony and future hearings.
Great. Thank you so much, Mallory. I want to give a last chance, Dominique, if you wanted to say anything. All right, hearing none, I think it just remains for me to conclude the hearing. With this, this hearing of the Ways and Means Committee of the Boston City Council is adjourned. Thank you all.
Long ass hearing. Jesus Lord. Bye.